It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Hello and welcome to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show and a production of WFUV Sports. We'll be with you all night, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and of course on 90.7 FM. It's just past 11 p.m. here in New York. It's below freezing outside, and we've got the next 3 hours to talk about nothing but sports. And Chris, it truly doesn't get better than that. My name is Kelly Bright. Chris Boccia is my co-host. Jack Roach is going to join us a little later with the headlines for the day. And Alex Wools is the man behind the scenes, making us all look good. Chris, we've got such a jam-packed show today ahead of us. But before we do that, first day of Fordham spring semester, just around the corner. How are we feeling about it?
Pretty good, and always good to be with you here on One. February 1st, we start our classes, but tomorrow I'll be in the Bronx, officially moved into the digs there. I know that you moved in as well. That's always a nice feeling. It was an extended break, maybe a little bit too long, so I'm ready to get back, but it was nice taking some downtime, but definitely looking forward to a new semester.
Oh, definitely, and I'm beat you by a day. I'm back in the Bronx now, and it's just as cold and just as nice as ever. I'm so happy to be back. So happy to be on the show with you today. And, let's get right into it. I was going to take a little bit to build up the suspense, but our first guest interview today is just such a big deal. Chris, you and Jack had a chance to talk to Tiki Barber, New York Giants all-time rushing reception leader, TV and radio host, and honestly a contestant for one of the most interesting men in the world. How was talking to such a big New York icon?
A very cool and a tremendous communicator, makes it even better because he's got the football career, but also he's a commentator on all things National Football League. He's got some really great thoughts ahead of the Super Bowl. He's got some really great thoughts on the Deshaun Watson saga, which I know we will get into. So Tiki, just ton of wisdom. Obviously, he's got the family connection to the Super Bowl a little bit, and his brother, Rondé Barber, who is a longtime Tampa Bay Buccaneer and now a finalist to go to Canton at the NFL Hall of Fame. So I think Tiki's got a little bit of an interest in this game, but needless to say, really great preview of, as we'll discuss later, what's going to be an awesome Super Bowl between Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. It just doesn't get better than that.
It really doesn't. And it's great hearing from Tiki Barber. I mean, obviously, any New York fan, he's a household name. And how do you forget a name like Tiki Barber? I mean, that name was
right.
Made for professional sports. And obviously, great conversation with that. And it's hard to follow, something like that. But to finish out that 11 o'clock hour, we're going to break down all the drama with Deshaun Watson, like you mentioned, and the Texans, which to me, Chris, is starting to feel a little bit like the whole James Harden saga. And I don't know. What do you think? Is this going to be a situation again where the player gets his ways, where the player gets his wish granted?
I mean, ultimately, I think it's inevitable. It's an untenable situation. There's just too much ill will built up at this point. The head coaching search went awry, but I think it was setting in earlier. This is a Texans team that was really bad last year with one of the game's best quarterbacks. It just can't survive. You heard the general manager, which is sort of the interesting twist here, come out and say, we won't trade Deshaun Watson. There's basically no circumstance. We have no interest in moving Deshaun. And that's the right thing to say. It's a good image for them to pull off because they probably have at least 12 NFL teams on the phone with them trying to get somebody who is a franchise quarterback, an automatic upgrade for most of the teams in the National Football League. So it's the right, it's the right face to show, which is that we're not going to move Deshaun. But I think at the end of the day, they don't have a choice. Deshaun Watson clearly doesn't want to be there with all the reports that are coming probably from his camp, his agent. And obviously, as we'll discuss, the New York Jets are in a position to strike. There's no question in my mind. Nobody has more capital. Nobody has a better ability to go get him. And there's definitely an inclination, definitely a sign out there that Deshaun Watson wants to be a New York Jet. I'm not sure why, but he wants to be a New York Jet, which I welcome, and I hope that they make it happen.
I'm also not sure why anyone would want to go to the Jets. I mean, I guess at least Adam Gase is gone, and they bring in Rob Saleh, and hopefully that's the beginning of a new chapter for them. But I mean, there's got to be something in the water in Houston, because everything we're hearing about, the controversies coming out of front offices in these major teams that have had success for the better part of a decade, both the Houston Rockets and obviously the Texans. Yet, these top name players, their all-stars, are so unhappy there. And, Deshaun Watson expressed concern with the front office and not liking the culture there. And what do? They go out and they hire a new head coach, and still he expresses interest in leaving. So very interesting situation there. I'd be interested to see if they're able to, get rid of a contract that he just signed before the start of this season, and if he's able to get out of there and find a new team, especially given how many quarterbacks are moving around in this off season. But, anyways, let's get away a little bit from football and go into baseball, which we've had a lot of news this week. Jack Roche is going to join the show with a baseball headline segment, and we're going to get into the Curt Schilling Hall of Fame debate, which I think is very interesting. Obviously, this week, finding out that we have no Hall of Famers, nobody got the amount of votes needed to be elected into the Hall of Fame this year, and we're also going to get into Friday's late-breaking Arenado deal, which was huge in the baseball world, one of the biggest deals of the offseason so far. Still a few names left out there, like Trevor Bauer, but for now, that's going to be a very interesting conversation. And, after that, I thought somehow we would make it through this show without talking about GameStop, because it's all I see on all of my social media feeds. GameStop, stocks, the whole Dogecoin thing, it's just out of control. But then Dave Portnoy and Steve Cohen happened. And so we have no choice but to get into some of that mess. And from there, we'll get into the Mets and Yankees. And Chris, you being a Mets fan, how have you liked, besides this whole Steve Cohen mess, which might not actually end up impacting their team anyway, but we'll get into that later. But how have you liked their offseason so far? Do you think it's been a positive one?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to remind myself every morning that Francisco Lindor is a New York Met. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing, and I'm excited to see him in the uniform. So right there, it's a massive success. But I think there's more to be done. I think that they will do more. I think his name might be Trevor Bauer, and if that's what happens, then all bets are off. You can just forget about it. This is a home run offseason. They went and got probably the two biggest pieces outside of Arenado that moved this offseason. So hard to complain there. They moved Steven Matz this week, which is interesting. A guy that I liked. I mean, a local guy and somebody I really thought was going to figure it out, but he just never quite did, which is sad to me to see him go. But I think the Mets didn't really have a choice there. I mean, they had a choice to give him another shot, but he has had a number of shots now. And there was some speculation once that shoe dropped, Matz is out, they're clearing the way for Trevor Bauer. It doesn't appear that simple. But certainly I think speculation in order that they move a starting pitcher, there's going to be a starting pitcher coming in. And I certainly hope his name is Trevor Bauer.
Yeah, and it does seem to be shaping up that way. I don't know how you would fill that hole any better than Trevor Bauer, but like you said, it's never simple, especially with a player like Bauer who loves to drop the drama on social media, loves to, tease fans and organizations. So it's going to be a big question mark as to where he ends up, especially knowing that he's probably looking to break that AAV record that Garrett Cole currently holds. He's looking for that big contract, even if it's 1-2 year contract, which the Mets might be in the perfect position to offer. So definitely a big question there. But rolling over the 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock hour, we've got a segment from our Off the Air podcast sponsored by WFUV Sports with Joe Violone. Chris, you and I got a chance to sit down with this WFUV alum and Media Squared president. And Chris, he had some pretty interesting stories to share with us.
He did. And, as we found time and time again with everybody that we've been able to talk to on this podcast, there's such a glowing review of our program, which has taken such a different shape this year. But one-on-one, New York's longest running sports call-in show, right? Like, it's gone back a really long time. So there's a long legacy, long history of roots. And again, with Joe, we just find somebody who has a lot of good things to say, has built up a tremendous career in the sports industry, him on the production side. So really fascinating to hear some of his stories from the world of sports.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to hear sometimes people from behind the scenes instead of always hearing from people who are on air. But obviously, great conversation there. And we wouldn't be able to finish out the show without adding in some more football. We mentioned Deshaun Jackson earlier as being a part of a very confusing and convoluted mess of starting quarterback openings coming into fruition this offseason. But thankfully, Jack Roach is going to come back on the show and break it down for us. We're going to go through it, hopefully make it a little more simple and give our takes for where some of these bigger names are going to end up. I know as a Patriots fan, this is an offseason I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to. Huge question marks there, but we'll get into that later. One more thing with Jack, we're going to go into some basketball. This may be way too early considering voting doesn't end till February 16th, but I know Jack had some hot takes. Chris, you might as well also have hot takes on this, but we're going to give our early takes for the NBA All-Star selections. And then finally, we're going to round out the show with some early Super Bowl talk because they let me host the show a week before Tom Brady appears in the 10th Super Bowl, and I could talk about Tom Brady for 5 hours straight. So we're going to have to get into that. Chris, this might be a little early, but what do you think? Am I biased in saying that Tom has a chance of taking home his 7th ring?
No, I mean, I think anybody would say that Tom has a chance to win a Super Bowl. He's done it 6 times already, so nobody would be surprised to see him holding the Lombardi. Again, I mean, I'm so conflicted because I don't want to see him hold the Lombardi a 7th time, and it's like a little bit absurd now. But at the same time, I don't mind seeing him do it in a Bucs uniform quite as much, so it won't pain me the same way. On the other hand, do I want to see Patrick Mahomes do it again? Not really. I mean, I always find myself when it comes to the Super Bowl not feeling enthused about one team or the other. It would be nice if, maybe the Browns made it. I'd be happy to get behind an underdog like that. But nonetheless, these are 2 heavyweights because you do have Tom Brady, who's the old guard, legacy, greatest of all time. And you have the new up-and-comer Patrick Mahomes, who's already got a ring. And I think we'll see him in plenty of Super Bowls throughout his career and absolutely going to challenge Tom's mantle of the greatest if he continues at this pace.
Oh, definitely. Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, 2 of the greatest to play in the game. Tiki Barber, one of the greatest Giants. His interview is coming up next, and I promise you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned. One-on-One will be right back.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. A very special guest with us this evening, Tiki Barber, the former Giant and a 3-time Pro Bowler, Giants Ring of Honor. Really, really happy to have you with us, Tiki. Thanks for taking some time.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. How you guys doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. And of course, looking forward to Super Bowl 55 and not too long. But before we get into the Super Bowl, and I know you have some family ties there, I want to start with a New York centered question. And it's all about Deshaun Watson right now.
Yeah.
And it really would be hard to imagine him not leaving Houston at this point. He formally requests a trade. And I can't imagine how many teams are probably on the phone with Houston right now. Do the Jets control this market, though? They have the number 2 overall pick. In all likelihood, they could put together the best package. Do they control this market, and how likely is it that Deshaun Watson is wearing a Jets uniform next year?
Look, to me, it's the easiest destination and one that makes most sense simply because Deshaun Watson wants to go to the New York Jets. And you guys know this. It's so rare to have a player, even if it's a star player, with a no trade clause in his contract, and Deshaun Watson has that. And so the fact that he can basically pick and choose where he wants to go is it could be troubling for Houston if they decide to send him somewhere else. Now, if I'm Houston, I want to send him out of the AFC. I want him to go to go to the Falcons or go to the Washington football team as opposed to going to the Jets. But if I'm Deshaun Watson, I do want to go to a place where I have a stability in a head coach, a belief in that head coach, and an organization that's going to, I think, build around me to win a championship. It used to be that you guys remember this back in the day. It was like, all right, you make a name for yourself, you make some money, and then when you're 28 or 30, you start worrying about winning a championship. I think Pat Mahomes has ruined that for everybody. So all of these young quarterbacks, they get paid early, obviously, and then they want to win championships. And I think Deshaun Watson saw the dysfunction in Houston and says, we're never going to win here. Get me someplace where I can. And so that's what he's looking for. And it starts with the coach. It starts with the organization. But the Jets control it. They have the most assets. They have the most cap space of, I think, the teams that are looking for a quarterback. And it makes the most sense, to be honest with you.
How's it going, Tiki? You're a guy who hasn't always shied away from your criticism of your former team. And looking at the position that Watson's in and his frustration with Houston, how much power does he really wield with that no trade clause? And what can you tell us from your experience?
Well, I think he owns a lot of power simply because he can refuse to go. He can refuse to show up. And we know that the team is stripping down, and if they continue to create this environment that is untenable, not just for Deshaun Watson, but for other free agents, the organization goes to pot. The prime example, and we saw this just 2 years ago, is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Remember the story about the NFL Players Association recommending to free agents not to go to Jacksonville because of how they were running their organization? And a lot of it had to do, unfortunately, with my former head coach, who was the vice president of player personnel, and Coach Coughlin. And you're shot. The program is shot. You can't win when free agents don't want to go there, no matter how much money you're going to throw at them. And so I think Deshaun Watson has power because he controls that narrative over the Houston Texans. J.J. Watt is also in the same boat, but they've already said, look, we'll facilitate your exit out of here as well. You hear the Andre Johnsons of the world and the old heads that used to be stars in Houston saying the same things. So they need to reset. And the only way they're going to reset is by getting rid of this negative energy that Deshaun Watson is bringing to their program. Now, as an aside, if I'm them, I'm trying my hardest to hold on to Deshaun Watson. But David Culley, who we all, we heard that hire, we're like, who? Like, who the hell is that guy? He's got a great personality. He's got a great reputation. He's 65 years old. He's been around for a long time. Maybe he can smooth it over, but the likelihood of that seems very, very slim.
How much of Robert Saleh is a factor in this? Because, of course, he's the new Jet head coach. I'm curious your perspective on him. And do you think that this is something that's drawing Watson to the Jets? And
no doubt,
if he is a Jet, this is a place that hasn't been historically great for quarterbacks to play. And he doesn't go in with a great supporting cast already. What do the Jets have to do to make this a comfortable place for him? And of course, that begins with Saleh.
So I think one of the most important things that a head coach has to do is win the first press conference.
Yeah.
This in New York. We've seen it a couple times with the Giants, and we saw it with the Jets. If you lose that first press conference and people are like, huh? It's hard to recover from that. Robert Saleh definitely won the press conference. And not only that, he's brought in a staff that I think is it's really important for a Deshaun Watson type of quarterback who's coming in. Now, they could decide to stick with Sam Darnold. I don't know what their thinking is. But with 70% of the quarterbacks in the NFL being not as good as Deshaun Watson, every team that has a need is going to look at him. And so the Jets have to do this. But by bringing in Mike LaFleur, who is obviously Matt LaFleur's brother, as the offensive coordinator, you know that the innovation is going to be there. The innovation that we saw out in San Francisco, some of it that we see in Green Bay a little bit, and that success has got to be exciting, right? And if you're a young quarterback and this isn't like college where you go, I want to play in an exciting offense and spread and do all this other stuff. But you do want to play in an offense that has the ability to be successful, right? One of the things that we saw with the Jets for the last 3 years, it felt unimaginative. It was, I knew you were going to call that play because you called that play every time on 2nd and 8, right? And so I think that the staff that Robert Saleh has built is important, but also the story that Robert Saleh tells is great for Deshaun Watson. The organization, as we know, has had its issues, from the top down. But I think by bringing in a culture changer like Saleh, it changes the perception almost immediately of this Jets organization.
You mentioned those family ties with the LaFleurs, and I just wanted to say I was a big fan of the books you had with your brother growing up.
I love those.
I read those and loved them with my brothers. And I was just curious what it's like seeing your brother with the, potential bid for the Hall of Fame. And is there any brother or family dynamic out there in the landscape of sports right now that reminds you of what you had with your brother?
Yeah, the McCourty brothers are there in New England, and Jason spent most of his career in Tennessee, and then he came and played with his brother Devin in New England. And so the fact that they were playing together is something that is amazing, because I always wanted to do that with Rondé. I only got to do it in Pro Bowls. We were teammates in the Pro Bowls, but that's a nonsense game. So to see them and the fact that they both won a Super Bowl together in New England is kind of cool. The Watts, actually, who I mentioned before, even though they're not twins, those brothers have. I mean, JJ was a legend. I mean, multiple defensive players of the year, and then TJ is probably going to win it this year. Like, the success that they've been able to have it's a blessing. And so I love those family stories over that we've seen a couple of times over the generations. And so to your question about my brother in the Hall of Fame, I can't tell you how excited I am for him. It's been a long time coming before he could get into the finalist. I don't know if he's going to make it this year, but he's in the conversation, and that's what's most important. And eventually he will be in, because he's done some things in the slot position that he really redefined the slot position in the NFL, and not a lot of defenders can claim to have done what he's done numbers wise, but also just accomplishment wise.
Talking to Tiki Barber here on One, and your brother, of course, the former Buck, won with them, now a Hall of Fame finalist, and now the Bucks back in the Super Bowl under Bruce Arians. And I think what the Bucks have been able to do started with Bruce, and of course, then it was Tom Brady, now playing in his 10th Super Bowl. Is this the ultimate statement of Tom Brady's legacy now? A chance to get a 7th, but also representing the National Football Conference in the Super Bowl. Yeah. And also, what does this game say about Bruce's legacy?
Yeah, so here's the thing. I mean, how many times have we heard this? It's cliche-ish, but how many times have we heard this? Oh, we just need one guy. We're a player away.
Right.
That's never true. I don't care how many times you've heard it. I don't care how good it sounds on sports talk radio. No team is ever a player away. until this year. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers were Tom Brady away from being a Super Bowl viable team. And we saw this last year with Jameis Winston. He was fantastic and also terrible at the same time. And so, you could see that they had the potential. Their defense was aggressive. Shaq Barrett led the league in sacks. And JPP, even though he was banged up and had a neck injury and missed, I think 6 weeks after that car accident, he still was an impactful player. So their defense was good. Their secondary was young, but they were growing, right? And their offense had all of these weapons. But Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions last season, and that held them back. Now you bring in Tom Brady with a coaching staff that is one of the best and maybe the most underrated. In fact, that all the coordinators are black, I think is a great testament to the diversity that Bruce Arians believes in. Which, by the way, just as an aside, that started back when he was in college. He was roommates with my dad at Virginia Tech, and they were the first black-white roommates at Virginia Tech. And so his belief in inclusion and opportunity has been that way since he was 19, 20 years old. With that being said, Byron Leftwich is a really good coordinator, and we've seen the development and growth of that relationship with Tom Brady. I think Todd Bowles, despite his failures as a Jets head coach, is a fantastic, diverse defensive coordinator who can confuse you, as we saw with Aaron Rodgers and with Drew Brees, but also be smart and develop some of these young players. Antoine Winfield Jr., who had that pick against Aaron Rodgers in the Packers game, it was a key. Like he's developed these guys so well. And then you throw Tom Brady into the mix. It's a recipe for success, and it's why they're here. It's not by accident. I think Bruce had a plan. He thought Jameis could execute it. Jameis couldn't. He moved on from him, and he put a wish list out there and said, hey, Glazers, go get me Tom Brady. And they were able to get him Tom Brady, Jason Light, their general manager, and we see the success. Success doesn't happen accidentally. It's not just circumstance. I think you got to give credit to Jason Light and Bruce Arians for having a vision, executing it, and having it work. And Tom Brady is a piece of that. Obviously, he's a big piece of it because he's so consistent and he's such a great leader. But I think the success should be shared. It's not just on Tom; it's on everybody in that organization.
If I could follow up on that, one thing I wanted to ask you about was the diversity in the National Football League in the coaching ranks, and where the Bucs have had a lot of success there, and they've won perhaps as a result of it. You heard Andy Reid yesterday express some regret, some surprise that Eric Bieniemy has not been able to land a head coaching job, and he's now been through the interview process now 3 times. And I was surprised that he didn't get a job last year, and here he is another year without a job, and it is, to me, shocking. Your thoughts on that? What do you attribute it to?
So the process is flawed, and it's not anybody's fault. That's my initial take. It's flawed, and it's not anybody's fault. So you can't wait until mid-February to have a sit down, a conversation, make this decision about who your next head coach is going to. You just can't do it. The draft, the league year starts a month and a half later, and the draft is a month after that. You can't get a staff together because half of being a head coach is hiring the right people to populate your staff. And so you can't start that process in February. And so the best and the brightest, even if they are minorities or otherwise, are often playing deep into the postseason. And the curse for Eric Bieniemy has been that the last 2 years, at least, he's been deep into postseasons and now in the Super Bowls, but always in the postseason. The Kansas City Chiefs are always there. Like Andy Reid doesn't get enough credit for the amount of double-digit win seasons that he's had, and Eric Bieniemy has been a part of 4 of those as an offensive coordinator. And so part of it is the process is flawed, and there's no way to fix it because you can't do it earlier. You know what I mean? You can't have these interviews take place while the Kansas City Chiefs are prepping, to take on, whoever they're playing in the AFC divisional round or the AFC championship game, right? That's a disservice to the team now. I think the other thing that we're starting to see change is the guys who are hiring head coaches are starting to look like the Eric Bieniemys. They're becoming more brown, becoming black. We saw this offseason. I think there were 5 general manager positions that were open, and 3 of them went to black candidates. And in fact, I think I'm forgetting what team, Atlanta. I think it was Atlanta, only interviewed black general manager candidates. And so as that starts to change and general managers start to hire or want to hire head coaches who have the same experiences as them, we'll see this start to shift. It was interesting when you think about the history of the Rooney Rule, because it started with coaches, right? It started with, you got to interview a minority candidate before you hire your head coach, and then a couple years later, it moved to the general manager position. The Rooney Rule expanded. It probably should have started with the general manager position and then gone to coaches, because that's how change happens, from the front office down, not from the head coaching position up.
Yeah, it's funny to see guys like him and Josh McDaniels almost be punished by their success deep into the playoffs. And
I mean, but that's the reality of it, right?
Yeah. You mentioned Andy Reid, and that's a guy who you went up against in your tenure with the Giants when he coached the Eagles. What do you expect to see from him as a guy who's always innovating and throwing different looks at teams?
Yeah. So, the beauty of Andy Reid, and by the way, I had no idea. I thought he was he came off as like a jerk a little bit on the sideline until I went to I think it was my last Pro Bowl. He was the head coach of the NFC, because they had lost one of those championships. So the NFC losing team in the NFC was that staff was the coach of the Pro Bowl. And so he was my coach. And I was like, man, this guy is the awesomest coach in the world to play for. I can see why his guys loved him so much and still do love him. He has this demeanor that's very different than how he actually is. Not dissimilar to Bill Belichick, but and so what I expect from Andy Reid is diversity, and and things that we haven't seen. Like, the beauty of their offense is that it's so movement based, right? And the pieces are interchangeable, right? It's like, so Travis Kelce is a tight end, but you can easily line him up as an X receiver or the Z receiver, or put him in the slot and make him do anything. And as a defense, especially if you try to match, and the Buccaneers do this every now and then, they try to match, play man coverage and match defenders to skill position players, you can get confused really, really easily. And all of a sudden, you'll have a Tyreek Hill matched up on, let's say, Levante David, and it's stealing. Like, Pat Mahomes is there in a second. And so I think the diversity in personnel, because their skill position players can do everything, is what gives them a little bit of an offensive advantage in this Super Bowl. So I expect him to do that a lot.
Tiki Barber, you can catch him on Sue Live on Super Bowl Sunday. I have one more for you, Tiki, before we let you go. These two teams have met before in Week 12. I think a very different Bucs team than we saw back in Week 12, and sort of a legendary quarterback matchup between the greatest ever and somebody who's going to challenge Brady's mantle, in his career. Your thoughts on the game? What do you expect to see in a little over a week?
Yeah, so it's just, you mentioned Sue Live, and I do a broadcast on Sue Live every Wednesday at 10:30, just talking sports. Sometimes I do interviews with artists and other those in the music industry, etc. And we're going to do a Super Bowl or big game pregame show on Sue Live with in partnership with Amazon Interactive Video Services. So we're excited about that. Me and my brother and Montel Williams. It'll be different. Tino Martinez is going to be a part of this, talking like fans. Not talking like analysts, but talking like fans around this game. So I encourage people to download the Sue app and check that out. It comes right with you. It's right in your phone. But as I look at this matchup, I see two teams who have every bit of opportunity to be the Super Bowl champion. There's not one team that I say has an advantage. I think that the Buccaneers defensively have the ability to get after a quarterback. And if there's one way to slow down Pat Mahomes, and most people cannot do this, the Raiders somehow were able to do this twice this year. They beat them once. But the way that you slow down and disrupt Pat Mahomes is get home by only rushing 4, right? You don't have to send a 5th guy or a 6th guy. And with Shaq Barrett off one edge and JPP off the other, we saw them against the Packers. They had 5 sacks between the two of them and 4 tackles for a loss between the two of them. That's how they're going to try to disrupt Pat Mahomes and force him to hold the football and make mistakes. Tampa can be opportunistic, but Pat Mahomes doesn't make a ton of mistakes. So they have to rush him and force him into mistakes. Interestingly, I think between the two players here that we all want to talk about, the quarterbacks, Pat Mahomes and Tom Brady, I think Tom Brady has more of the I'm going to screw it up potential than Pat Mahomes does. I don't. It's just a sense that I feel, and maybe it's because we've seen these games where Tom has, thrown for 5 touchdowns and been perfect, but we've also seen these games where he's done for 3 interceptions and a couple of pick sixes. So if the pressure gets to Tom, meaning the physical, like the actual pressure gets to Tom, he's not mobile, and they're going to have to rely on other ways. So the defensive game plan of Steve Spagnuolo, who we all know has had success beating Tom Brady with those when he was with the Giants and Tom Brady's with the Patriots, that's going to be the key. It's going to be the defenses are going to be the key, even though we're going to want to talk about the offenses. I think the Chiefs are going to repeat. But obviously for sympathetic reasons, and because I love Bruce Arians, and I want to see the home team hosting, a Super Bowl for the first time in NFL history win. I'd love to see the Buccaneers win, but I see this as the Chiefs having too much firepower on offense.
Tiki Barber, we thank you so much for the time. You can catch him on Sioux Live at 1 o'clock on Super Bowl Sunday on Tiki and Tierney on CBS Radio. Thanks so much, Tiki, for taking the time today.
Chris, Jack, appreciate you guys.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Has been all over sports news and sports media for the past few weeks. We're not even done with the 2020-2021 NFL season, and we're already focused on one of the biggest names for offseason trading, and that is Deshaun Watson. The 25-year-old led the NFL in passing yards and yards per attempt, and he's now requested a trade out of an organization that finished 4-12 despite his immense talent leading the charges from the pocket. Now, Houston Texans general manager Nick Caserio said Friday in an interview that the team has, quote, zero interest in honoring that trade request. But Chris, we'll just start out with it. Is he right in wanting out of the Houston Texans organization?
I think he's right. I think he has every right to declare this. You've seen it happen in other sports, less so maybe in a sport like baseball, although Nolan Arenado is a good example. We're going to get into it later. So it's happening. It's happening. People are dissatisfied. Deshaun Watson's one of the best quarterbacks in all of football. He's nothing to sneeze at. He's a big time passer. So he has the right. The Texans have done a really poor job. It was Bill O'Brien was running the team and did a terrible job. They botched the whole coaching search because they apparently told him that they would consult him, and then they didn't, and they didn't go look at Robert Saleh, who's of course the Jets coach, which immediately makes Deshaun Watson interested in the Jets. They didn't want to go interview Eric Bieniemy. So lots of issues there. And I think, and you heard Tiki Barber say it, I think that Deshaun Watson has a lot of power here with the no trade clause. And what we saw the other day from the GM and the head coach was really a front. It was a way of, trying to hold some of the leverage that they have, because they are going to trade him. When they trade him, it's going to be a historic package. I'm pretty convinced of that. They're going to get, a king's ransom, as they should. So that's what I see the maneuvering all about. I think that they want to maximize what they can get from Deshaun Watson, and rightfully so.
Oh, exactly. And, JJ Watt coming out, we just heard news today that he's also wanting out of this organization. So clearly a lot going on behind the scenes that these players are just extremely frustrated. And clearly it's something that the hiring of a new head coach isn't going to solve, and it goes deeper than that. So, and you just look at Deshaun Watson's body of work. I mean, 3 straight Pro Bowls, 70.2 passer completion percentage, 112.4 passer rating. And he just comes in every year and is able to be one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league, despite lacking a true number 1 receiver this year with, when they traded out DeAndre Hopkins. His O-line has been struggling, and yet he's led his team to a pair of division titles, and he's just not getting anything in return. And you see this with so many players, like you said, across sports now who, they give their all to a team, and then eventually, they want more, and it's hard to blame them for wanting something more. So I think he's right in asking for a trade. And like you mentioned, Tiki Barber also mentioned that no trade clause is huge. I think it does give him a little bit of leverage, but at the same time, Watson, he signed that 4-year extension less than 5 months ago. And I think if a team has that contract over a player, they do have some kind of leverage. And especially now, players, they're going to get fined $50,000 daily for any training camp holdouts, after that new collective bargaining agreement. So it's if this thing gets ugly, and, it's going to come down to Deshaun Watson sitting out of practice and holding out, waiting for them to agree to a trade for him, he's going to keep getting fined, and he's going to lose money. And you just got to wonder how long he can hold that out. And even if he wants to retire and try and get out of it that way, the Texans would have the right to collect $21.6 million from their former first-round pick. And furthermore, just because he retires from the Texans, they don't lose his rights. And if he unretires, he just goes back to the Texans. So
Right.
Tricky situation, and it's going to come down to him finding a team that both him and the Texans agree are the best fit for both of them, because at the end of the day, the Texans can choose just not to trade him. So it's going to come down to finding a team that works for both of them. And Chris, what team do you think fits that role best as of right now?
Well, they're going to move him because they have to. It's unsustainable. You can't have an unhappy quarterback like this. It just culturally won't work, and they stand to get a lot for him. I know, of course, they don't want to move him. There's really no price that would justify it, but they don't have a choice with what he's publicly expressed. I mean, and this is all very public knowledge that he's unhappy in Houston. So like the Harden situation, which you referenced earlier, we just, at the end of the story, we know that he gets moved. The question is where, and that's what you posed. I think the Jets have the most to offer. The Jets have to go get him. The Jets have to make it happen. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, they have what it takes to get him. They have the draft capital. They have the financial capital. And the indication is that Deshaun Watson wants to be a Jet. So make it happen. What does it cost? It's going to cost a lot. It's going to start with that number 2 pick. It's probably going to include that number 23 pick. So 2 first-round picks right there this year. And then perhaps another next year. And that's a lot. That's a lot. It doesn't make me feel happy, but I mean, you're gonna have to pay. I don't know if Sam Darnold makes his way into a deal. I don't want to see anybody else in the deal, though. I don't want to see Quinnen Williams in the deal. Like that this Texans team is going to ask for a big time player in return. If the Jets go get Deshaun Watson, well, it's win now mode. So you certainly don't want to scale back in terms of what you already have. Some of the few talented guys that you already have, Quinnen Williams being one of them. Deshaun Watson, bottom line, is a guy who we need to be seeing in the playoffs, perhaps deep into the playoffs every year. You have a new generation of quarterbacks coming in now that's taking shape, and you got a good look at it this postseason. Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, all in the playoffs on the AFC side, and some of this old guard quarterbacks that we've seen in the playoffs for so long. You'll see Brady on Sunday yet again next week. But Roethlisberger and Manning and the list, the long list of quarterbacks that we just keep seeing time and time again deep into the playoffs. Deshaun Watson belongs on that list when it comes to the next generation of quarterbacks. There is no reason why a quarterback as good as him should be on a bad team. So he's made an assessment about Houston. He's probably right about it. His belief that the Jets are going to be a better situation is a bit of a leap of faith, but it starts with Robert Saleh. And by the way, it encourages me that he has enthusiasm about Robert Saleh, that he wants to be a New York Jet, that he thinks that the Jets will bring something different than Houston does, shows a lot of hope in the new head coach, which we've seen across the board. I'm very eager to see what Saleh does. So long story short, it's got to be the Jets. The Jets have to make it happen.
See, for me, you're saying, all right, Deshaun Watson, he's a great player. He deserves to be on a great team. And then you throw the word Jets in the next sentence. And for me, that doesn't sit right. To me, all right, yes, I agree. I think Robert Saleh is a great addition to this team. I think it's very exciting. I think he could really come in and change the culture of this organization, which has needed a culture shock for years now. However, is he going to be enough? Is Deshaun Watson going in there going to be enough? I mean, yes, he's obviously, to me, better than Sam Darnold and any other option they've had in the past few years. But one of the reasons you could argue that Sam Darnold hasn't been as successful is that they're missing a lot in their offense, their offensive game and defensive game. But that's a whole nother story. They don't have any all-star receivers. Their offensive line is very average. Running game isn't there, So you bring in Deshaun Watson into this situation, and you're kind of putting him in the same situation he was just in, just a new organization and a new coach. So I don't know. I agree. I think for the Jets side of things, it's going to help. It would help them immensely. But for Deshaun Watson, I'm thinking, is this really where you want to go? Is this really the better option? I mean, we're talking about a Jets franchise that has been the laughingstock, no offense, but the laughingstock of for years now. And to me, hearing, the Jets, that's a much better option. It just doesn't sit right. And then, you mentioned the Jets have the most to give, right, to get Deshaun Watson. But if you have the most to give, you also have the most to lose. So you're looking at the draft capital on everyone they have right there. Do you really want to give up all this draft capital, which could help potentially rebuild a team and more than just the quarterback position? And you have the second pick of the draft, and there's a few good quarterbacks in there besides just Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. Exactly. There's other options. So you got to wonder, is it worth bringing in this one quarterback and giving up the next 2 years worth of rebuilding, the next 2 years worth of picks that could really help you rebuild this franchise?
I don't think there's a question that it's worth it. I don't think you can say no if you have the opportunity at Deshaun Watson. Say what you will about the quarterbacks. You may love him. You may love Wilson from BYU. You may love Justin Fields from Ohio State. But there is no replicating Deshaun Watson. He is a ceiling for probably both of those guys. And you don't know that they recognize that ceiling. So I understand it takes more than just the number two. But it's a no-brainer to me to do it if the price is right. I mean, if it's the two, I should say, and the 23 and one pick next year, it's a lot, but it's what you have to give up. Now, why Deshaun Watson wants to be a Jet, I mean, that's the part that we don't really know. We don't even know if that's necessarily true. I mean, I don't know if that's being inflated by the New York media, but it seems to be the indication. There's certainly no denial. The bottom line is that the Jets control this market because they do have the best pick, which means that they may not have to tack on two additional first-round picks. Maybe it only costs one and a second or something else. But if Deshaun Watson wants to be a Jet, and again, that's the part that we're not totally clear about, but for argument's sake, if that's the case, then he could potentially tell the Texans I'm not gonna waive my no trade clause in the event that you send me to, let's say the Giants want to get him. I don't know why he would, again, we don't know why he might feel connected to Robert Saleh, but I was going to bring up the Giants because I don't see a scenario why they shouldn't be in the sweepstakes for Deshaun Watson. I don't see a scenario why almost every team in football shouldn't be in the sweepstakes for Deshaun Watson. I mean, of course, there are the exceptions who have the great quarterbacks. The Seattle Seahawks aren't going to strike a deal for a quarterback. But if I'm the Giants and I got 2 years of Daniel Jones, I would consider it. I mean, he's an instant upgrade for a team like that. I think every team should be in the running. And like I said, no matter how you slice it, the Jets have the best case here because the Texans are going to want their shot at a quarterback in this draft. If they give up Deshaun Watson, they get the number 2 pick after Trevor Lawrence. They get their shot. If they love Wilson or Fields, they're going to get their pick. So the 2 is just that valuable.
So you mentioned the Giants as another option. And I think you're right in that almost every team, any team that isn't one of those top 10 quarterback teams, like the Buccaneers or like the Bills, who already have their situation figured out, should be in this conversation and should be looking look at our roster and look at our draft capital. What do we have to give up for this generational talent who's arguably top 5, maybe even top 3 quarterbacks in the league? He just hasn't had the team, to give him the success that he deserves. So a few other teams, the Dolphins, you look at the Dolphins, you got, Tua Tagovailoa, that's a great option right there. He was back and forth with Ryan Fitzpatrick all season with the Dolphins. They also have a bunch of draft picks available. And you look at that situation, defense is good. Offense is just a few more weapons away from having a very competitive team. They have a strong front office, which is opposite of the Texans. They brought in Brian Flores. He's been amazing there. The team seems to be really bought in. There hasn't been a lot of drama, which is, again, just so different from what Deshaun Watson has been used to. They have the number 3 overall pick this year. They have the number 18th overall pick. They have some different options. Cornerback Xavier Howard, he could be a piece that they could potentially move. He was tied for the most interceptions of any player over the last 15 seasons. So he kind of goes under the radar. That's one piece they could trade. There are other options, I think, for Deshaun Watson to look at beyond just the Jets, who have maybe a better chance of being competitive sooner than the Jets might be.
The Jets absolutely have a lot more to do beyond the quarterback position, right? They're a 2-win team. So how many wins does Deshaun Watson get you? Well, it's hard to measure. I mean, does he vault them immediately to 10 wins? I don't think so. I think it requires more. I mean, he was able to win 4 games with a bad team. So the Jets are a bad team. You'd have to start from there and say you need a lot more around him. And frankly, there's not a position group that's an exception to that. The Jets have a need everywhere. They need a running back. They need receivers. They need cornerbacks. They need linebackers. They need linemen. They need everything. So it might be a process. I mean, you may be able to make free agent signings. I haven't looked too much about the market this year, but you go in, you bring in Deshaun Watson, and the Jets are a different destination for free agents. They're a different destination for anybody you draft. You've got the new head coach. You've got the new quarterback. All bets are off. Everything is different at that point. I think Miami's interesting. I think they're probably less eager to strike a deal after just drafting, who they expect to be their franchise quarterback. There's obviously a lot to be seen, and the jury's still out on Tua Tagovailoa. But I'd be surprised if they wanted to move on now. So when I look around the league, I think New England is a team. Obviously, they're in need of a quarterback. I'm sure Deshaun Watson would want to play under Bill Belichick, but again, they have less capital to offer. But you look around the league, there are certainly plenty of teams. Washington needs a quarterback. Detroit now needs a quarterback. San Francisco may want to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. We're not sure there. And I'm missing some. There are a lot of teams that are looking for a quarterback. So the market is robust. One way or another, he's going to get dealt.
Oh, exactly. And you mentioned the Patriots. The only thing I think the Patriots have is a disadvantage in this. Well, they have a few things as a disadvantage, but one major one is they're not often willing to pay their quarterbacks. I mean, you look at Tom Brady, he left because not only were he took pay cuts for the better part of 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
brought them in 6 Super Bowls. And they wouldn't go and find him offensive weapons when he asked them, and that's why he's now playing for Super Bowl with a different team. And, you know, you look around what they've done with their quarterback since, you know, Cam Newton, that 1-year deal definitely wasn't going to be the answer. They haven't really gotten any significant backup since Jimmy Garoppolo. You know, Jarrett Stidham, are you kidding? That's your backup plan? Jarrett Stidham, really? So, yeah, the Patriots are going to have to look for a quarterback. And my question is, do you wait and do you think somebody like Mac Jones is going to be the answer, a lower quarterback in the draft? Or do you go out and you try and get somebody like Deshaun Watson? Do you completely rewrite the script of anything Bill Belichick's done in the past, and do you lay it all out there and go for Deshaun Watson? Is Bill Belichick sitting and watching, I really messed this up with Brady. Let me try and fix something. Let me get a different quarterback. And you bring in Deshaun Watson. I'm sure any player, any quarterback would love to play in a system that, you know, brought 6 Super Bowls in with Tom Brady, who obviously came in as a very low draft round pick and was able to be so successful. So maybe Deshaun Watson looks at that as a chance, you know, to rewrite history and be a part of a strong organization. But at the same time, again, like you mentioned, Patriots might not have a lot, you know, to offer Deshaun Watson. They also might not be willing to pay. So again, I think it comes back to the Jets. And as much as I think it's an interesting choice as an organization that you want to go to, you know, save your career and maybe contend, I wouldn't pick the Jets. For some reason, Deshaun Watson seems to be pretty hopeful that they're going to be the perfect team for him. So hopefully for my Jets fans out there, he ends up there. But until then, Chris, it's a huge question mark, and I think it's going to be a big topic of conversation for the few weeks to come.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about the Patriots, because I know we have, I think, 2 Pats fans on the call here, and Kelly and Jack Roach, who we'll hear from later. You're right about the fact that Tom Brady was the best soldier that Bill Belichick could have had for so many years. And maybe we'll save a little bit of this for later when we get into the Super Bowl, because Tom's going to be there. Patriots just had a terrible year. The hubris of Bill Belichick finally, I think, backfired on him. I think, you know, this is a guy who is obviously brilliant. There's no denying it, but thought that he should move on from Tom Brady. And, you know, this is definitely not the best look for him. When it comes to Watson, I think you're right. I think Bill Belichick would probably prefer to do it through the draft, you know, and maybe he'll be able to do it in the 6th round again. But there's probably somebody in the draft that he would rather have than go spend the money. And that's just how he operates. If he had it his way, he'd already have his successor to Bill Belichick in place, and that would be Jimmy Garoppolo. So I would be surprised, you know, based on that, to see him mortgage the future. I think he's eager to be able to draft in the first half of the NFL draft for the first time in forever, right? So, you know, the Belichick thing is interesting, but maybe we'll save a little bit of the conversation on Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and the whole narrative there, because I'm fascinated by it. I think that Belichick thought that Brady was done and it was time to move on, and Brady had something to prove, and that's what he's doing now.
Exactly. The thing about being a genius is that you're either, when you make a crazy choice and a crazy decision, you're either a genius or it doesn't work out and you're an idiot. And I think right now, with the line back and forth with Bill Belichick, which pains me as a longtime Patriots fan to say, but it's getting harder and harder to back up some of the choices he's made, including having his dog run the draft last year and pick a D2 cornerback as their first pick when they were in desperate need of a quarterback. So again, like you said, I think we'll get into more of that Tom Brady discussion later, but for now, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, Jack Roach is going to join us to talk some baseball with his first headline segment, but one-on-one, we'll be right back.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Back with Kelly Bright and Chris Boccia, I'm Jack Roach, and we've got some baseball news to discuss. We've heard the Nolan Arenado trade rumors all off-season, and one finally materialized last night as the Rockies agreed to send their 5-time All-Star third baseman to the St. Louis Cardinals. He's fresh off of an 8-year, $260 million extension in 2019, and the Rockies are also sending $50 million to the Cardinals to compensate for that salary. So I want to hear your guys' reaction to that trade, and where does this put the Cardinals in that NL Central race?
Well, for me, I read a headline when I first heard about this news, and it was a Deadspin article, and it said, Rockies trade Nolan Arenado to Cardinals, give up on being an actual baseball team. And if that doesn't sum up what the Rockies got out of this deal, I don't know what else does, because you look at, Nolan Arenado, he literally was the heart and soul of this team. And like you said, they just paid the Cardinals to take him. And the Cardinals just need a little bit more offense. They're poised to be the best team in the NL Central at this point, because the rest of the teams have had a pretty quiet offseason. So you bring in somebody who's as good as Nolan Arenado, one of the best talents in the league, especially at his position. Yeah, he might have had a less productive 2020 season, but that was a season was brought down by Corona. It was a 60-game season. So I don't usually like to use any stats from that season to really show how good a player is. He's just such a great talent. And the fact that the Rockies gave him up for so little just doesn't really make sense to me. And it's pretty sad for the Rockies organization.
It's created a massive problem in baseball. It's emblematic of what's happened in baseball that is really disconcerting to me. It's similar to what happened with Lindor, who moved from the Indians. This is not good for the sport of baseball to see a team like Colorado that has a franchise cornerstone in Nolan Arenado, who they gave the long-term deal. This was clearly intended to be a long-term or career-long relationship. And I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. The deal is not even official. He still has to waive his no trade, which we think he will. The league still has to approve it because there's a large sum of money being moved. But for all intents and purposes, this is happening. The Cardinals get a lot better. The Rockies get a lot worse. This has become a winner-take-all sort of baseball economy where you just have, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. It's really bad for the sport when less teams are competitive. The Rockies should be competitive in the National League West. They had Trevor Story at shortstop. They should be a good team. It's really bothersome for me to see. The Cardinals obviously become a favorite in the National League Central.
Yeah, and you see another team in the Central doing the same thing that you're criticizing.
Right.
And that's the Cubs, right? They sell Darvish, and it looks like they're going to do the same thing with Chris Bryant, who, I don't know if you guys remember, they manipulated his service time. This is his last year on that contract. So they do all that just to give up on him and send him out of town. But you've got
some
the
irony
Reds
there.
getting worse. You've got the Reds getting worse. You've got the Cubs getting worse. And the Pirates are not going to contend. It looks like the Cardinals are the team in the Central, but are they now a National League contender, or are they just the best of a mediocre division?
I mean, it's tough to tell. You're looking at this Cardinals team that was 14th in the NL out of 15 teams in runs scored last year. They were 10th in 2019. So, is one player going to be enough to push that needle? I don't know. It does fill a hole in the infield. Colton Wong out. It moves Tommy Edman over, shifts him to fill in at second. Matt Carpenter would have likely subbed in at third, but I think Arenado is obviously significantly better. So it does boost their chances significantly in this NL Central division, like you mentioned. However, is it going to be enough in a very competitive NL, conference? I don't know if it fully moves the needle. I think they still have a few more questions, especially pitching wise. What if they're going to be able to compete at that level? At this point in baseball, you need such a strong rotation in order to be successful. You need more than one or two. They did re-sign Adam Wainwright, and that, yes, that's a great move for them, but is that enough? I don't know.
In terms of the National League, Dodgers, the Padres certainly will be in play now. They've been aggressive. They've been one of the few teams that, it's the Padres. Now you have the Cardinals, the Mets, who have went out and got somebody. And then everybody else is on the selling side, and there's just not there's just nobody in the middle anymore, it feels like. There's always been sellers. The Pirates have been perennial sellers. But, in terms of the National League, you look at, are they better than the Dodgers? Probably not. I mean, the Padres, the National League East is going to be the most competitive division. Again, I think, with the Mets and the Braves and perhaps the Phillies. But, it's just upsetting to see the sport go in this direction. I really hope that this is the product of the half year and all the lost revenue, and that the sport is able to figure it out next year.
Phillies re-signing Didi Gregorius on a 2-year deal, keeping the NL East competitive. But I just want to stick with a team that you mentioned, Chris, and they're a team that was linked with Arenado, and that's the Dodgers. We also heard rumors of them going out and getting Lindor, and them going out and getting Bauer. And if they end up missing out on all these guys, how do we view this offseason for the reigning World Series champs?
I mean, likely they are going to miss out on both those guys. I mean, they did miss out on Lindor, and I believe they're also going to miss out on Bauer. And if they do have Bauer, I think it'll be for 1 year and then he's out of there. So they are reigning World Series, champs, and they did have the best roster in baseball last year. So, you go into an offseason and you kind of think, all right, the goal is to just not get worse. And I don't think they got worse. They did have a few free agents they haven't addressed yet, but they certainly didn't get better, and other teams did. So I do think that gap between being the best team by far in not only the NL, but maybe arguably even the whole league has shortened, and it's gotten closer. But I do think they come into the season still legit contenders.
Definitely legit contenders, but the Padres, have closed a little bit of daylight in that division. This is going to be wide open. And I think, not to tie it into the Mets, because it's what I always do, but if the Mets go get Bauer, I like to say all bets are off. You can forget about it. I mean, they're going to be vaulted to the top. You're going to have to be a little bit nervous if you're going into Queens and playing them in the National League. This is a team that's going to become instantly formidable.
Yeah, I don't feel like the Dodgers are going to have just a quiet off season. And I know they've lost Jock Peterson. They're still negotiating a contract with Justin Turner, but it seems like when they're as good as they can get, they go out and make some impact move. We saw that with Mookie Betts, and it resulted in their first World Series ring in quite some time. But I don't know. Do you really think that the Dodgers are going to sit quiet and do nothing?
No shot. I mean, it's so early too. We always have these conversations, and they're not playing till April, so there's still time. At the same time, free agents are coming off the market pretty fast. I mean, just this week alone, look at how many big signings there have been, whether they're re-signings or just players finding new locations. And I think Bauer is going to be the next one to go. I suspect we'll know where he's going the next few weeks. So you're starting to lose the amount of options. I mean, I know I was just looking at the Yankees, and they're in need of a lefty batter, in my opinion, and there's just not many out there. There's just not many left. So you look at the Dodgers lineup, and they have a strong lineup. So you think they're not going to go out and they're not going to need to get someone who's worth a lot of money, even though the Dodgers have a lot of money. And this is a league that favors teams that have a lot of money. And if you have a big market share, you're going to be able to get more out of it. And you just look at the teams that have been successful. I mean, minus maybe the Rays, most teams that have been successful in the past 10 years are the teams that have the money and are willing to go spend it. So I don't think there's any big name agent besides maybe Trevor Bauer that the Dodgers would be willing to go out and get right now. But I would suspect they still make a few more moves.
I don't think you can count them out on Bauer at all. I think they're probably one of the big players next to the Mets. And, I think the Yankees are similar in that they've been mostly quiet, although I like their moves at starting pitcher Kluber and Tyone now to give some depth to a rotation that doesn't have a lot of star power, but now at least has some depth. Behind Garrett Cole, that is not a lot of star power. I think that both those teams probably have something up their sleeve and that we haven't heard the last of them for this offseason, because if you're in the position to strike for a World Series, especially in the case of the Yankees who haven't got one, you're going to make the move. And I think that they've got something up their sleeve.
I want to pivot to the Hall of Fame because there were 0 inductees in this year's class of finalists. And the name that everyone's talking about is Curt Schilling. He narrowly missed out on that 75% threshold needed to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. The 3-time World Series winner has requested to stop the count and be removed from next year's ballot, which the Baseball Writers Association has urged the Hall not to do. I just am curious what this says about the politics of the Hall of Fame, and do you think that Schilling ultimately deserves to be in?
Well, listen, sports and politics are intertwined at this point. It's unavoidable. I mean, just the cultural blending that we've seen over sports, politics, entertainment, it's just unavoidable at this point. And I think it's a good thing to some extent. Players should speak out. Players are more than what's the push now? They're more than just athletes. I mean, I'm a student athlete, and I would say that I have opinions on more than just sports. And I think that's true for any professional athlete, whether they be retired or still in the game. Now, that being said, there's a difference when your political opinion is, I wouldn't even say political. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but when you're coming out and you're making comments that are not even subtle, but blatantly racist and blatantly controversial, it gets a little challenging, because when you look at the rules provided to the Baseball Writers Association when voting on players for the Hall of Fame, it says, quote, "Voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contributions to the teams on which the players played." And so that morality cause is something that's kept players like Pete Rose out of the Hall, even other players on this ballot, Roger Clemens, Barry Bonds, for using PEDs. So people look at things beyond just baseball stats, and whether or not has Schilling done enough to keep him out of the Hall of Fame based on just comments, that I think is up for debate. But I don't think you can just look at a player's body of work just based on stats. I think we're beyond that at this point.
I'm a little conflicted over this. I think, I don't think that it's controversial to say that the on-the-field product of Curt Schilling is Hall of Fame worthy. I think we may agree on that. Based on his longevity, World Series win, never got a Cy Young, but obviously more than 200 wins on the mound and a legend. So on-the-field product, Hall of Fame worthy. This character clause, the morality clause, I have been a longtime supporter of using it against PED users. I think that the Hall of Fame becomes tarnished, and I feel like I'm in a baseball minority on that point. But I've felt that way strongly. So in that sense, I appreciate the clause. Like you were getting at, Kelly. Nobody should be punished for their politics. I mean, I like nobody should be punished for who they went out and voted for. That's different from the case here with Curt Schilling, which has been, some serious, let's call them violations of character. It's not about politics, it's not about who he supports politically. It's about what he has said. And the most recent example on January 6th, when there was a terrorist attack in the nation's capital. This was somebody who expressed sympathy for those who attacked and overran the Capitol. That's a if we're going to ever invoke the character clause, that the track record that he has built up without apology would probably warrant it. But here's the thing: the system is broken. It should not be the decision of the baseball writers to weigh the character. First of all, it is a hard decision. It's objectively subjective, right? There is no way to measure it out. And I don't know how you do. I think Buster Olney has a good suggestion. He says, leave the character clause to the Hall of Fame itself. The committee should decide on that. Don't let the baseball writers decide. There's an argument that I've been behind for a long time, which is that the Baseball Writers of America shouldn't even be voting to put people in the Hall of Fame to begin with. There's a good chance that Curt Schilling failed to get 75% of the vote on his baseball record, and not even because of the character. We don't even necessarily know that, but the baseball writers are notoriously bad at their job of selecting who should go into the Hall of Fame. So it's very possible that he just missed it because they took stock of his product, of his body of work, and said he doesn't deserve to be a Hall of Famer. So I don't even know if you can attribute this to the character thing. If you can, that becomes very controversial, and I don't think it should be up to the writers to make that decision.
You guys both mentioned PEDs, and I want to touch that. But before I do, we've seen like the writers even request to change their ballots after they already mailed it in. I'm just curious, do you think that this whole situation sets a bad precedent for someone beyond Curt Schilling in the future? Like, is this a move that permanently changes the politics of the Hall of Fame?
It's an interesting question, and I think it kind of goes back to the point that Chris was getting at there, and how you don't even know the reasons behind their decision not to put him in the Hall of Fame. And you look, he missed it by 5%. There was still a significant chunk of those voters who supported him being in the Hall of Fame. And if you look at his stats, 216 wins, 3.46 career ERA, 6-time All-Star. He never finished first in a Cy Young voting, but did finish second 3 times and 3 World Series rings. Now you look at the other pitchers who have been elected to be a part of the Hall of Fame. There's plenty with fewer wins or a higher ERA, but there's also plenty who have lower ERAs and more wins. So, it goes back and forth. Is this just a baseball thing? Is this more than that? And again, like Chris mentioned, I think there's such a fine line between deciding someone's political view isn't acceptable and deciding someone's actions are immoral. And, that we're in a part of our country right now. And I think, again, this goes way beyond sports, where there's a fine line at this point on both sides of the spectrum, and we are a country that preaches being able to have free speech and freedom of opinion. And as maybe controversial as one side may be compared to another, people are entitled to their opinions, and to punish them for having those opinions, is that unfair? And is that something, like Chris mentioned, that should be taken out altogether in consideration for the Hall of Fame? Should it purely be their baseball performance, their baseball stats? And I don't think it should be, because I think athletes should transcend more than just numbers. And I think you look at a game, and a game is about more than just the final score. A lot more happens in a game than just the runs the batters that touch home plate. So I think you do have to look at the bigger picture. However, I think in order for someone to be disqualified based on their character and integrity and sportsmanship and all that, I think it's a lot less controversial when it's something that's more tangible, like taking PED supplements, or with Pete Rose, admitting to, throwing games and that kind of thing, versus maybe just saying something on Twitter or saying something in an interview. So again, it's a very tricky situation, but I think in this situation, it might need to be it definitely something you need to look at as how legit and how substantial are his offenses. Do they deserve him not making the Hall of Fame?
Well, the rule as it's written, I don't think it has been incorrectly applied. I mean, if there's a character clause, and there's obviously a famous gold standard to get into Cooperstown, you've seen it harshly applied against Pete Rose. You talk to any baseball fan, they believe Pete Rose is a Hall of Famer for what he's done on the field. It's been unfairly not that it's been unfairly used, but it's just unfairly written. It probably shouldn't be there. I'll say this. I think that it doesn't hurt anybody to put Curt Schilling in the Hall of Fame. I condemn this man. I think he's, a jerk, and I think a lot worse of him than that, but nothing that I could say on the radio. But I am bothered by the victim narrative, and that Curt Schilling is a persecuted person. Definitely bothers me, but there are a lot of people who feel that he's persecuted for his views, and I don't think anybody should be persecuted for their views. I think even if they're hateful, they are protected under, certainly under our country's constitution. Now, baseball could make an exception to that and say, well, we're going to have our own standards here, and they have for a long time. So based on the standards that they've established, I don't think it's incorrectly applied at all. And again, it's an if that's how the baseball writers made their decision about Curt Schilling. And again, we don't know. But it's certainly come to a point of controversy where it's worth rethinking the entire system. Like I said, baseball writers probably shouldn't even be involved to begin with, but taking away this subjective lever from them and saying, let Pete Rose in. He did not commit an on-the-field crime. And the same goes for Curt Schilling. And so based on that, put them in the Hall of Fame. It doesn't, on its face, hurt anybody.
Rapid fire before we head out. Chris, I know you're not a big Bond supporter. A lot of people will say that he should be in. Do you think that him being in opens the floodgates for all the PED guys, or can you separate him or a guy like Clemens from the rest of the bunch?
Yeah, I mean, it's been my long held position that the answer is no. I don't think anybody who used a performance enhancing drug should be in Cooperstown. I mean, I know that there is another side to this, that at one point it was legal, that there's just that, that there are users who are probably in, and I get that. But I think with what we know, I wouldn't want to see anybody who's used a performance enhancing drug in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. It's difficult. I don't think if you have been found guilty of using performance enhancing drugs, then your stats are skewed, and I don't think they are fair to compare to others. However, that being said, as pessimistic and as cynical as this view might be, I think there's a lot of guys in the league, if not the majority, who are involved in things like that. Even if we're not talking about it a lot, even if they have been caught, quote unquote, yet, I think it's a very just some of the connections I have that I know who are in the minors or in the league, I know it's a very prevalent thing, and that people do unfortunately look to these enhancing drugs and steroids and that kind of thing. So I think if you do open the floodgates and you say anybody who's been caught using these is able to be in the Hall of Fame, I think there's a lot of guys today that would love that, because I think there's a lot of guys in today's game, even maybe some of the best ones, even some of the all-stars of today's game that also participate in those kind of activities. So it's tough.
Agreed. And that's it for headlines. We'll be back with some more baseball talk, getting into local sports with Mets and Yankees. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One. I'm Kelly Bright here with Chris Baccia, and we're gonna talk some baseball, some New York baseball. And Chris, you being a Mets fan, we're gonna start with the Mets. A lot of different moves this offseason. One of the most recent, Steven Matz traded to the Blue Jays as part of a 4-player deal. And this deal opens up a spot in the Mets rotation. It clears out $5.2 million salary. And it gives them, in my opinion, the opportunity to go after reigning NL Cy Young winner Trevor Bauer. And if they were able to get Trevor Bauer, Chris, I think the Mets rotation could end up being one of the best in the MLB. What's your opinion?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, I've had the chance to say it a couple times on the show already that, you know, if you get Trevor Bauer, all bets are off. The Mets instantly become one of the favorites in the National League. One of the favorites in all of baseball. So, you know, it's probably going to cost a lot in terms of the average annual value of the contract, but the Mets may be able to do it on a 4 or 5 year deal, which I think is very attractive. Absolutely puts them in a tremendous place. They're actually, interestingly, and I know we're going to get into the Steve Cohen fiasco, who is now off Twitter, and we'll talk about that. But one of the things that he said in response to what's happened this week, there's been the thought that the Mets perhaps are going to be strapped for cash because of this short squeeze and everything that's happened on Wall Street, and the fact that it may have, or probably did, hit Steve Cohen's wallet. But in his statement that he just released, I literally just read it. He says he still has the resources. The Mets have the resources to do it. And I just love to hear that. I mean, it sounds like it's not going to affect the way that it did the Wilpons when they were in some trouble financially. In this case, the Mets seem to have the cash ready to go.
I mean, Stephen Cohen, yeah, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but he still has a $14 billion net worth. I mean, he lost a lot of money, but a lot of money is a lot different when you're a multi-billionaire than when you're a college student. So I don't think the Mets are in trouble in that regard. But like you said, are they going to be able to have enough to go out and get Trevor Bauer? You know, he's still in conversations with the Dodgers and the Angels as well as other teams. But you look at this Mets team, and are they willing to make a good short-term baseball decision that they know could turn out to be questionable long-term business decision? I mean, you look at some of the other examples of pitchers who have been given these types of deals that Trevor Bauer's looking for. Sabathia with the Yankees, you know, he took him to a World Series title. So did Verlander in Houston. So did Scherzer in Washington. Sale with the Red Sox in 2018. These were all good baseball decisions. You know, these were all good at the time, but then you look a few years down the road and how much arm do they have left? How much is in the tank? You know, Sabathia, even with the Game 7 start, he was kind of a shell of himself by the end. So is it worth investing with Trevor Bauer for 4 years and one of those longer term deals?
Yeah, it's obviously an age-old question at this point, since the introduction of the mega deal. And, you know, the Mets have not been one of the teams who's participated in that. So I'm a little bit eager to get the chance. I mean, they've had a handful of long-term contracts. Johan Santana, David Wright, both didn't really pay down well when it came to the end. Obviously, Wright got hurt whom I miss very dearly, actually, now that I bring up his name. But the Santana thing, he got hurt, so the injuries are always a factor with these long-term deals. But remember, those were 8 and 7 year deals, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a lot longer than 4 years, right? That's double the length. So the idea behind the 4-year contract at the high value, which made best Garrett Cole's AAV record, is that you can spend a lot, but in the short term, and not lock yourself up for 9 years the way the Yankees did with Cole, or the way, a number of other teams that you mentioned have done over the years. So I think it's a much better formula. There's a scenario where it works very well for Trevor Bauer too, because he's got to play for perhaps one more contract, probably one more contract. He stays motivated to do that, and gets another contract, maybe ends up making the same amount of money. Jacob deGrom's sort of in the same situation where he's going to need another contract, because I believe he has 3 left since the Mets extended him. So if you get Bauer for 4 or 5 years, I don't really care how much it costs. It's not my money. And as you mentioned, it's the money of somebody who's worth $14 billion. I'm happy as a fan if it means that the Mets are not connected to this guy in the very long term. They get him for the next 4 years, prime of his career. You pair him up with Jacob deGrom, you go get a World Series. That's the formula for me.
Yeah, and DeGrom isn't the only one they have for long term. Like you mentioned, DeGrom under contract through at least 2023 with a club option in 24. James McCann, he's the catcher they just signed through 2024. Pete Alonso, Dominic Smith, Jeff McNeil, they're not going to be free agents till after 2024. Carlos Carrasco, the veteran right-hand pitcher who came out of Cleveland with Lindor, he signed through 2022 with an option in 2023. So you have a lot of players in this lineup who are going to be there for a long time. You have an opportunity for the Mets to really develop into a contending team. They have a lot of their best players signed on for multiple years, which in sports today, that doesn't happen very often. So if they're able to bring in Bauer for that same amount of time, I think they can really do some really awesome things. And I think I was going to ask you this anyways, but Lindor, I think one priority the Mets could have is extending that 1-year contract that he has right now. I mean, he's a 4-time All-Star shortstop, and you look at last year, he might have had an off season, 27 RBIs, batting .258 with 8 homers. But again, like I mentioned earlier, it's a 2020 season that I don't think you can really look at stats as an accurate representation of these players' skills. But Lindor, he's an established guy, and he aligns with what Stephen Cohen has kind of promised the fans here, and that's being a consistent contender for multiple years. So do you think extending that contract should be a priority for the Mets?
Absolutely. The trade goes from a win to a mega win if you can extend him. I think it was the pretense of the deal. You traded 2 young, promising shortstops. You would certainly like to see him extended. But I'd also be open to extending Michael Conforto instead, or maybe both. I mean, I think Conforto is a really critical part of this team, but you don't necessarily need to. I think the Lindor thing is probably higher priority just because of what you gave up to get him. So it certainly justifies that trade even more in sort of a retroactive way. The Mets, there's no coincidence behind Steve Cohen coming in, buying this team, Sandy Alderson coming in, signing on as team president. These are people who said there is something to be tapped here. Steve Cohen knows a market that is untapped that needs to be tapped. And he looked at the Mets market and he said, this is a team that has an outstanding core already assembled. They are 1 or 2 star players away. They don't even have to be stars. They are a few pieces away. Fill in the gaps and go get a World Series. And they're in position to do that. If they get Bauer, that's the big if. But even with somebody else, I mean, I'll certainly be confident, but the Bauer thing will put them over the top, and you can forget about it.
Yeah, and if they're able to get Bauer, that would be awesome for Stephen Cohen's, first year with the Mets. I hate that we have to talk about this, but we have to talk about it. We mentioned it a little bit briefly earlier, but Steve Cohen involved in this crazy stock market thing this week. I don't even have the time to explain all the intricacies of it, but essentially thousands of Reddit users, and you could call them the little guys, the lower class, have banded together to jack up stock prices of GameStop and other declining retailers for a potentially massive payday at the expense of these hedge funds that have been betting against companies and shorting. And one of those people involved is Steve Cohen, and he has that estimated worth of $14 billion. So I think some of the money that he's lost in this, yes, he has lost money in that, and say what you want about that, but you have to also think that you got to figure the pocket that he's keeping his money for trading and insider trading is different than the money he's spending on the Mets organization. And I don't think the two are hand in hand. I think he's right in saying that it's not going to affect his ability to finance this Mets team. It is interesting that he deleted his Twitter account, that happening late last night. I don't know if you want to give your comments on what your thoughts are in regard to that. This is somebody who's been pretty active with fans on Twitter, and which has kind of made him liked by Mets fans. So deleting his Twitter might throw an interesting wrench into that dynamic.
Yeah, well, a real reversal of fortune in terms of the PR that the Mets had. They go get him. Obviously, the entire New York media is ecstatic about it. The Wilpons are out of town. They stink. Nobody liked them. They ran a terrible franchise, and they were just not enjoyable to engage with. Nobody wanted them here. Not a soul. So everybody was eager at a new owner. Nobody could have gotten better PR than Steve Cohen, who brought a great energy, promised to spend a lot of money, primed New York to have an outstanding baseball rivalry in the short term and hopefully in the long term, because he'll be here for a long time. They go out and get Francisco Lindor, which was the big strike. So the media couldn't have been better. He's communicating with the fans on Twitter. He's got some wit to him. I mean, it was hilarious. He built up this persona, sort of, this Uncle Steve persona. And then just things kind of collapsed in the last week or so, and reality sort of hit the Steve Cohen that was having a good time, it seemed like, on Twitter. The Porter news breaks. Jared Porter, the general manager, who sent lewd photographs, harassed a female reporter during his time in Chicago. That came out. Terrible scandal, really bad look for the Mets and for Steve Cohen. And then this has happened, and he's found himself on the other side. I think people who overlook the fact that he doesn't have the best record. Remember, he was fined by the SEC for $2 billion years ago, and sort of would fit the persona of an enemy that a lot of people would paint out of people of his wealth and his status. But of course, that there was an exception, because he was going to use his wealth for the betterment of the New York Mets. So we all look the other way. And now I think there's been a reminder that he is kind of that guy, as he's sort of on the other side of what's happened here. So reversal of fortune there. He also had a poor choice of words. And I always kind of had this thought. He was certainly managing his own Twitter and putting out his own tweets, which is never the best policy if you're somebody who has, a serious communications portfolio. You run a big organization, like, let's say, the New York Mets, or maybe the United States of America. Maybe you shouldn't be running your own Twitter account. And so, but he was, and it gave him he was genuine and it was appreciated, but there was a mistake that a communications expert wouldn't have let him make, which he wrote in his tweet. "I'm just a guy trying to make a living," regarding what he was doing with the GameStop. And this was not the best choice of words. "I'm just a guy trying to make a living." Somebody who has the funding for a living for, let's say, 100 lifetimes. Like, there's no trying to make a living involved here anymore. You've made your living. So that was a poor choice of words, backfired on him. He's deleted his Twitter, and that's sort of the story there.
I think that sums it up. Just a guy trying to make a living, like us all. And with that, I want to get into the Yankees a little bit. A few announcements from them this week. They signed right-hand pitcher Darren O'Day, and I think biggest news coming that Tanaka will be leaving the Yankees. Obviously, a great player for them the past few years. And before I get your opinion on it, they've also had a lot of pitching changes this year, and their rotation is going to be a group of guys, most of which have not played in a few years. and most of which are coming off of surgery. And it's a lot of questions, and a lot of people are looking to Brian Cashman and Aaron Boone for answers. And we have a soundbite of Aaron Boone talking about that new look pitching rotation.
Obviously, we did as much due diligence as we can. We understand, some of the risks that come with it, but we're also incredibly excited about what we think they can be. And I think, if it goes well, and that's the expectation at their best, these are guys that you can, turn to in a postseason situation and match up against other great pitchers. So we know what they're capable of. We feel like from a health standpoint, they come in a very good situation. And I'm excited to see. I'm really excited that they're part of our staff.
So, Chris, are you as positive as Aaron Boone is in this rotation? Do you have as much hope in what they're able to achieve, assuming that they're all healthy?
I've been a longtime critic of Yankee rotations. I think that they have fallen short of putting together the right group of pitchers. Obviously, Garrett Cole went a very long way to solving that, gave them a true ace, which they had lacked for a bit of time there. I think Boone is right. I like what the Yankees are going to put together in terms of pitching this year. You could certainly question whether or not it's enough to compete with perhaps a National League team that's going to run out much better starters. But this is a pretty good rotation, and I think he's right that Kluber and Taillon give you something in the playoffs as a team that's thinking about the playoffs. But then just to look at what this group has already, beyond Cole, I like Jordan Montgomery, the lefty, a lot. Domingo Germán has turned in good stuff for them, Davy Garcia. So I think there's some promise there, even Jonathan Loáisiga, right? So there's a little bit of depth there. That's 7 guys right there, the 5 that I just mentioned. And now Taillon and Kluber, maybe they have something else to do still. They got Darren O'Day to help out the bullpen. You really never know what Brian Cashman has brewing. He may have more. I think he does. Like I said, with the Dodgers, I think both these teams probably have more to do in a slow moving market, but I'm actually pretty high on the Yankee rotation.
And maybe it's because I'm a Red Sox fan, but I'm a little nervous for them because the Yankees have been throwing their, putting all the cards on the table on this next man up mentality. People are going to get injured, and we're going to bring up these people from our farm team, and we're going to be fine. We have such a good lineup. We brought in Eric Cressy, who's this, guru of player health performance. But what has that done for them? I mean, they suffer from injuries every year. Aaron Judge is a prime example. You're not getting full seasons out of these players. And when you look at who they have lined up for those 5 starting positions, almost all of them, with the exception of Garrett Cole, are coming off some major injury, under rehabbing, and a few people, it's just, there's a lot of question marks. Severino, we don't even know when he's going to be back. I mean, he's
right.
June or July. So I think there's a lot of question marks, but I will give them the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, I think bringing Jameson Taillon from Pittsburgh was a good move. I think that's going to be Corey Kluber as well. I think that's also, he's obviously a 2-time Cy Young Award recipient, so never hurts to bring one of those into your rotation. So hopefully a better, a strong rotation for the Yankees. And I do think there's still one left-handed hitter. I mentioned this earlier. I still think they need another lefty in their lineup. They're one lefty away from having a contending roster all around. But still, for the Yankees, I think they'll compete. I think they'll compete, assuming all goes well and that their pitchers are able to stay healthy.
Yeah, and the LeMahieu thing was obviously enormous. They needed to bring him back. There was no scenario where he wasn't going to be in their lineup, or, I mean, if it was going to happen, it was going to be a big problem for them because they need his bat in that lineup. It's a power-heavy lineup, and he balances them out really nicely. I obviously think the Yankees are going to be favorites to win the American League East, with Tampa Bay making some subtractions. So this is, as we've said, in the Mets-Yankees segment, as we've been saying now for some time, a lot of promise for New York baseball next year. I'm really hopeful that we're going to get some very good New York baseball. And I hope, and I've said this also, I hope we get a chance to go to some baseball fields, go to the park, and enjoy a day outside.
Here's hoping to that. And we'll end our baseball conversations for today on that positive note. After this break, Chris and I sit down with Joe Violone, WFUV alum and president of Media Squared. Stay tuned.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome to another edition of Off the Air. I'm Kelly Bright Spaccia, and we are super excited to have with us today Joe Violone, Fordham alum, WFUV alum, and president of the award-winning production company Media Squared. Joe, welcome to Off the Air.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming on with us today. First off, how are you? How are you doing? How has things been since, the pandemic kind of shifted the whole sports industry?
It did. We had just gotten back from spring training, and we're preparing to go into the season. And of course, that stopped. Then basketball was paused. Those are two of our biggest clients. We do a weekly show for the Yankees, Yankees Magazine on the YES Network, and we do a monthly show for the Brooklyn Nets, and that's Nets Magazine. That's also on the YES Network. So we joke anytime the Yankees stop playing, we roll out Babe Ruth. So that's kind of what we did, and it lasted just long enough for us to run out of decades to go and reminisce about. We went from the 20s all the way through the current decade, and then did another episode, I remember, on the core, and then they made the announcement that they came back this August. So that kind of, by the skin of our teeth, we made it, and we went through. So it was exciting times, challenging times for everyone, health-wise and for work. We're just very lucky that we're able to just keep continuing, and that's kind of a constant theme with sports.
Before we get into your time at FUV and Fordham, I'd love to get a little bit better of an idea of what you guys do for the listeners. Of course, you're involved in production, big client of yours, the Yankees, the Nets, and others, of course. This world of production, I think of sports, there's some similarity with film, and there's so much romance to sports, and being able to go into, like you mentioned, the story of the core four of the Yankees and stuff like this. How exciting is it being in work like this, getting to tell stories about sports figures and do that work?
So that is, I grew up in North Jersey, probably the biggest Yankee fan ever, right? And that's why I went into this business. I majored in journalism at Fordham. Even back when I was in grammar school, I'd be writing fake articles, doing lineups on a typewriter, all kinds of crazy things. But I kind of knew this is what I wanted to do. If I could do sports, it'd be a dream. So, Fordham really, and we can go into that later, really prepared me for that in a number of very crucial ways. But in terms of the storytelling, I started with the Yankees. And my first job with the Yankees, one of the jobs was to produce their in-house TV show through the department that I was in. And that was Yankees Magazine, had just started. Mel Allen was the host. And I learned more under him. This is a Hall of Fame announcer, as famous as it gets. He was on the back end when he was working with us, but he was still doing This Week in Baseball and things like that. And he basically gave me a master's degree in writing for television and writing scripts, you know, where the period goes in a sentence, how you punch that period, and all these things still ring in my head. And if you're talking about storytelling, that's where it starts. It starts with the writing. You have to write a good, tight, compelling story. Then you build from that. You build your story from that. You build your edits from that. And TV, usually our segments are no longer than 2 to 3 minutes. So you have to tell a complete, interesting story in 3 minutes. And that's the challenge. And we do it, you know, Yankees Magazine is every week. So the guys who work for me tell those stories over and over and over again. You know, and over the years have become quite good at it.
And as a lifelong fan of the game, as you said, a lifelong Yankees fan, you know, you get to work with some of these legends, you know, Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter, I know you did work with. How do you balance, you know, professionalism and keeping, you know, your work as a top priority when you are such a fan? How do you balance, you know, that lifelong fandom with your professionalism? And has your kind of view of some of these players changed as you've gotten to go behind the curtain and see behind the veil and kind of see them, you know, behind the scenes? Has your perspective changed at all?
My second day ever with the Yankees, I was actually at Fordham. I was at FUV, but I got an internship with the Yankees, and it was in the media relations department. This was 85. I graduated in 86 and went to work for the Yankees in 86. But in 85, I was an intern, lowly, nothing guy in the media relations department, going and making copies and getting coffee. But they said, okay, Joe, go downstairs to the clubhouse and get the lineups, and you got to write it on the chalkboard. At the time, nothing, there were no computers, no nothing. So I'm dating myself. Anyway, you go and write it on the chalkboard, get the lineups and do that, you know, for the press box. Okay. So I ran down there and I went to Billy Martin, and, you know, I'm walking in the clubhouse, and it's the Yankee clubhouse. So some nerves and the pressure to get your job done is in a short answer, how you do that, how you balance that is you have a job to do. And if you can't do it, someone else will. To me, that was how I got through everything. But I go into Billy Martin, into the manager's office, and he's sitting there, you know, at his desk. He goes, what's going on? And I'm saying, well, Billy, I need the lineups for today. I got to go up to the press box. Oh, you do? Listen, and they were playing the Detroit Tigers. It was Sparky Anderson was the manager. Did Sparky give you his lineup? No, I came here first. Well, why don't you go get Sparky's lineup first, and then I'll give you my lineup. Okay. So I ran down the hall. Where's Sparky? Sparky's, so 1985, him and his coaches were sitting at a card table. It's a clubhouse, right? So they were nude, just naked, just sitting there playing cards with a big cigar in his mouth. And I'm like, okay, Mr. Anderson, I need a lineup if possible. Did Billy give you his lineup? He didn't. He told me to come here and get it from you. He stands up with the cigar in his mouth, just walks across into his office. Here's the lineup. Go ahead and show it to Billy. That's it. I take the lineup. I go to, all right, Billy, you want to see it? No, I don't need to see it. Here's my lineup. And he goes, listen, is George giving you any trouble? No, sir, I don't even think he knows that I exist. You know, this is my second day. He goes, if he gives you any trouble, you come to me. And I'm like, okay, I will. Give me the lineup. And so I ran up. That was my first day, you know, and the thoughts you get, are they just screwing around with me? What's happening? You know, but it's Billy Martin and it's Sparky Anderson and it's all these guys that you dream about, and you got to put that aside, and it's the stress and pressure of getting your job done is what gets you through. And the thing about WFUV that strikes me, I keep saying WFUV prepared me and trained me to do what I did in my career. It was the power of the second time, right? It's the second time I was doing something, because the first time was at FUV with people who were telling me how to do it, who were correcting me, who had the patience, right, at FUV to do what I would go on to do later in life under high stress, high pressure, and around people who had no patience. So it's much easier to do that, and the possibility to succeed is much greater if you're doing all that for the second time.
I think that's a great story, and the power of the second time, it rings true. I mean, even for myself, I found myself in the Islanders locker room, and I stepped on the logo in the center of the clubhouse, and the captain of the team, Anders Lee, shouted at me first, and I had no idea. I'm 19 years old, and I guess this is just how you learn.
Right.
And then the second time that I have the chance to do it, I won't make that mistake again.
You mentioned that you were working with the Yankees and then started your own company in the 90s, late 90s. How was that getting to be so close to New York media with how successful the Yankees were in that, that 5-year span with the 4 World Series titles, looking at it not only as a fan, but as someone capturing it from behind the lens?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a front row seat, and it was a front row seat to a turnaround from worst to first, and dead last worst to dynasty first. So it's as bad as you can be to as good as you can possibly be, right? And how that happened. And because you're in the media, you can do what a regular Yankee employee can't do. I can go to Stick and say, break this down for me. How exactly did you do this? And then go to Buck Showalter and say, how exactly are you bringing these guys along? What are the pitfalls? He would always say, like, a couple of things. These young players, there's a lot of ways out of this game. You can eat your way out. You can drink your way out. You can womanize your way out. Just make sure you play your way out. And some of the players that came up at that time, just as talented as those guys, weren't able to get their heads around that advice. But the core, they were, and they did. And, the sit-down interviews, 2 or 3 times a year, I'd sit down with George Steinbrenner and really go back his whole career. What did you do? Why did you sign Catfish Hunter? Why did you do this? The press is this. Why, how do you respond? These are 1-hour interviews where you just sit down and dissect his whole career, his thinking, his mental aspect of why he does things, the way he does things. And you learn a tremendous amount just because of the access you have as a media person. Personally, exciting beyond belief. I was on a float during a ticker tape parade going down Broadway. Life experiences that are rare, and at the time you're jaded. Oh yeah, this is there. How long until I get out of here? I'll never get out of here. Look at the traffic, 3 million people. I'll never. That's what stupid. But in the 30 years later, you were on a ticker tape parade on Broadway. So these experiences are just unforgettable. And then, later on, the things that you're able to do if you get good at telling these stories.
Staying on the Yankees, they have the best brand in all of sports. There's no bigger brand than the New York Yankees, an international brand, really. Your close-up view, what's been your perspective on, we hear about a Yankee culture, and of course you've worked with the organization for so long. What could you tell us about the Yankee way, the Yankee culture that has just made their brand, and of course you manage their brand in so many ways. What's made it so strong?
I think George, it starts and ends with George and the Steinbrenner family. That it goes down just from, they still can't have beards, right?
Right.
And that came from George. And then you look at the Boston Red Sox and you realize, yeah, it's a good thing they can't have beers, because some of these guys take it to extents that I don't understand, and that's fine. It's just personal taste. That has nothing to do. Nobody cares what I think. But that small thing lets you know that when you come to the Yankees, good or bad, you have a good season, you have a bad season, this is different. You have to conduct yourselves in a different way. And he always held everyone to that. And they hated him for it. They liked him for it. They rebelled against it. He didn't care. Just the way he thought was the right way to do things. And I think the Yankee culture stems from that. There were a couple of quotes he's had, the winning thing. He tried everything he could possibly do to win, even though early on, or through the 80s, I should say, There was a famous, there was a quote that he used to give me all the time. We won more games than anyone else in the 80s. We didn't get the championship. And I just want to say that second place is like kissing your sister. So he would say these things that are very old school, but you understood immediately what he's talking about. And the guys who carried that forth for him, I think, started to, when things started changing, were Buck Showalter and Gene Michael. They understood what he was trying to do. They agreed with it in terms of the culture, and they enforced it, and they hammered it home with the older guys, but especially with the young guys coming in. That's when you started seeing signs in the clubhouse. That's when you started, I want to thank God for making me a Yankee. All the championship banners that was painted on the walls in the minor league complex, all of those signs about winning, the importance of winning, conducting yourself correctly, that was all over the minor league complex at the Heinz complex down in Tampa. That's the first exposure these guys got to that. That was during the 90s, even further as Brian Cashman took the reins. Now, Brian has instituted a culture more of inclusion, because a lot of the Spanish players that would come from the Dominican and from the Caribbean had a very tough time, as you know, including Mariano, right? He couldn't speak English. He couldn't order food. He couldn't really eat well because he didn't know how to do it. All of these things that you're taking for granted, these guys struggled mightily with as 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids with no money and no language skills. So I think the Steinbrenners identified that. Now they have English schools in the Dominican and in the Caribbean academies that teach these people English before they come to America. The education, and they hire teachers, right? The education continues once they get here. Their English language proficiency, they have to get up to a certain level. Their diets are spelled out for them. They're told where they can shop and how they can eat. Their life management skills are developed along with their baseball management skills. That is, I guess, the biggest change since like 2010 to the current, from the way things were done in the 90s. So it's developed with Brian and the Steinbrenners to be best in class, really, in terms of that, and getting players comfortable. One of Buck Showalter's favorite sayings was, the only thing I want my players to be challenged by on any given day is the level of competition on that given day. I want everything else for them taken care of. And that is kind of what's happening now with certainly the major leagues. I mean, the way the Yankees are set up right now with chefs in the locker room, and their needs are taken care of because they have to perform at a high level, right? But that has now extended down to the minor leagues, where these guys are being managed and being taught to do things correctly.
Speaking of the Yankees now, I'd love to get your take on their current organization. Obviously, it's been over a decade now since their last World Series. And you look at their pitching rotation and some of the moves they've made this offseason, kind of interesting, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of guys who haven't pitched in what feels like 2 years now. How do you think they're getting closer to getting that, their next ring? How do you think this Yankees team is shaping up for the upcoming season?
Well, listen, they've been real close. I think they've been as close as you can possibly get, going to the last inning of the last two playoffs. But I think today they just picked up Joe O'Day, which a 38-year-old reliever. Right. So the moves keep coming. They keep coming. But yeah, I think the guys that they get, it has been the struggle has not been talent for them. Tragically, it has been health. And I know they've taken steps to address it as much as they can. The health is an unknown. It's the hardest part to solve, obviously. But that I think is the focus behind the scenes of trying to just stay healthy and get these guys to be able to stay on the field. But the new pitching moves, yeah, definitely. I think they are considered, I guess, to be short, but they have about 7 or 8 legit members of that rotation that can go in and compete, and then their lineup can fix a lot of problems in the pitching staff. But I like what they're doing. I really do, and I think the worries are not ability. The worries are, can they stay healthy? Because if they can stay healthy, they're gonna be a sight to see. It's like the Nets.
Right.
They can play defense. It's going to be a sight to see, right?
All right, Joe Violone, president of Media Squared. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with us here at WFUV on Off the Air. Good luck with your future endeavors and the season, and good luck to the Yankees. Hopefully you're right. Hopefully they're on the right path. But again, thank you so much for talking to us.
Okay, Kelly, thank you very much. Enjoyed it. And you guys, good luck to you guys.
Thanks very much,
right
Joe.
path there, right?
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Back with Kelly Bright and Chris Boccia. I'm Jack Roach, and we're just over a week away from the Super Bowl. More on that later, but we have got to discuss the headlines at the premier position in the sport, and that's quarterback. We've got some news on our first guy, Matthew Stafford. Lions head coach Dan Campbell just came out recently saying interest has been hot and heavy. How much legitimacy is there to that rumor and now statement from their coach? And do you think that there are any significant buyers in this situation? What are the chances he stays in Detroit here?
I mean, you look at Matthew Stafford, he's a 12-year veteran. And to me, even though this team finished 5-11 last season and he has 0 playoff wins since he's been with the Detroit Lions, half the teams who are looking for a quarterback would be upgrading by signing him. So yes, I think the idea that there's a lot of hot and heavy interest for Matthew Stafford is legit, and for good reason. You know, he's still viewed as one of the better overall players on the market. He's a great pocket passer. He's got a great arm, and he's a former #1 overall pick out of Georgia. So teams would be upgrading him. And I think he's a player. I know we discussed Deshaun Watson earlier. He's somebody who just hasn't had a good team around him, but I don't think their struggles should fall completely on his shoulders. I think he's a much better quarterback than the team he's been playing on shows. So you look at some of the options around the league, I think there's a lot of options. I think the Colts would be a great option. You know, GM Chris Ballard, he's left a lot of salary cap space there to absorb a contract like Matthew Stafford's and still be able to add a few more pieces. They already have an established running back duo with Jonathan Taylor and Hines. They have a solid O-line. And Frank Reich getting to work with a veteran QB for a second year straight, one who I believe is much better than Phillip Rivers, could be a great combination.
Right, and Indianapolis came close with Rivers and a veteran quarterback, and I think Frank Reich has a good pulse there in Indianapolis. There's a lot of teams that need a quarterback. I think the Stafford-Detroit situation is the perfect way to do a divorce. It just seems like it's very it seems like both sides agree. It seems very mutual. There's not sort of the drama that's coming out of Houston. It makes sense for both sides. It makes sense for Detroit to try to get some youth at the position and move on, turn over a new leaf. And it makes sense for Matthew Stafford to get the chance to compete and play in the playoffs. He's got the arm to do it. He's now emerging from the wrong side of his prime. But I think a veteran quarterback is valuable. You look at the list of teams, I've got like 12 of them here who could probably use a quarterback, beginning with Washington, Indianapolis, Chicago, Denver. Obviously, we know Jacksonville and the Jets. New England, Pittsburgh. Now Detroit has an opening, figuring that Stafford will be gone. Philadelphia, Carolina, and I even put San Francisco on the list of teams that might want a quarterback. So there's just a lot here, guys.
Yeah, I agree that the divorce is coming. They clean house with Patricia. It doesn't make sense to keep him. As for a destination, I've heard some rumors with the Rams. They have said that they're going to have competition between their quarterbacks now. Doesn't look like Goff is the prospect we once thought he was. But there are two hangups there for me. One, I just don't know where this money's coming from. The Rams always are making moves and signing guys and doing things, and I just never know where this money comes from. So that's one problem. And two, for me, whenever I would put on a Colts game this year, it just didn't seem right with Phillip Rivers on the Colts, on a team other than the Chargers. And I think Los Angeles is a good fit, but I just can't wrap my head around Stafford being on a team other than Detroit. Am I being crazy, or what do you guys think?
I think that's pretty normal. I think that's typical. It's some of these guys, you just get very used to seeing them in the same uniform.
Jack, you're preaching to the choir. I play in a Tampa Bay uniform all season. So yeah, it's strange when you've had a quarterback on your team for so long. Imagine watching football on Thanksgiving and Matthew Stafford's not on the TV. It just doesn't make sense. So it's strange, but I think both of you have said it now. I said it. It's time. It's time. This relationship has run its course, and I think he is going to end up on a team. And I think he's doing it. He's leaving Detroit in a good market when, like Chris mentioned, there are so many teams who are not only in need but almost desperate for a quarterback. And because of that, they might be willing to lower the price, the value that some of these quarterbacks would normally receive, because there are so many options out there. You look at Washington, the Washington football team. Great story there with Alex Smith, but he's not a long-term answer. And Stafford's a more talented passer, a bigger arm. And I think if he works with offensive coordinator Scott Turner, you could add a lot more deep throws to a call sheet that was pretty successful given this team and the division they were in. They did win their division this year, and they had a quarterback with, as unfortunate as this, half a leg. He's still coming from, his story is amazing, but he's not a long-term answer, and they don't have really anyone on their backups right now that to me would be better than bringing in Matthew Stafford. And there's a few other options. You just look around the league, and there's the Texans, they're going to be most likely without Deshaun Watson. Could they bring in Matthew Stafford? The Patriots, who we just mentioned, are out of Tom Brady. There's a bunch of different fits where you bring in a guy like Matthew Stafford who has the potential to be a lot more successful than he has in Detroit, given the right weapons around him.
So, Kelly, you're telling me that you're not on the Taylor Heineke hype train?
Unfortunately, I can't take it for that train. I'm going to have to get on a different one.
No, I agree. I just, with the Stafford situation, my head's telling me yes, but my heart's telling me no. And, I want to move to a different team. I want to talk to a better team, and that's the Packers. They're coming off the NFC Championship loss, and rumors have started to swirl around the presumed NFL MVP, Aaron Rodgers. He's still under contract, but after drafting a quarterback in the first round in 2020, reports of a somewhat fractured situation. Could you see Rodgers in a color other than green in this offseason? And where is that?
Well, for me, hear me out. This might be a hot take, but first of all, I would not be surprised if Aaron Rodgers leaves, especially given what just happened with Tom Brady, because they were in very similar situations. You've been with the same team for your whole career. You've given them nothing but your best, your success. Rodgers, obviously, he's 37, and he's just bringing home another MVP. So he's older. He's not young, and you got to wonder how many years he has left in his prime. So is he going to pull a move like Brady, go find a team, try and send it a full send, win it all with this one team in 1 year, and switch it up? He just watched Brady, who he's compared to very often, have a lot of success doing that exact same thing. And one team, you just mentioned it in conversation with Stafford, but I'm going to say the Rams. Look at the Rams team. If they get rid of Jared Goff, who, he's been they haven't been very confident in the fact that he's going to stay there. You look, Matt LaFleur, he left the Rams in 2018. He spent one season as the offensive coordinator for the Titans, taking over the helm at Green Bay. And the first thing he did was install an offense that was very similar to the one run by the Rams head coach, Sean McVay. So if you bring in Aaron Rodgers with Sean McVay, I think that could be a lightning partnership right there. If you have Sean McVay and Aaron Rodgers working together on a new team, kind of like what you just saw happen with Tom Brady going with Bruce Arians.
Yeah, you put those two together, you can just forget about it. I mean, but that really goes for any team. If Aaron Rodgers is on any team, they are an instant contender. I don't know that I buy this. I definitely think it's on the rocks. I think there's no question. It has been ever since they decided to draft a quarterback last year, which was bizarre to all of us. And I couldn't explain it then. I can't explain it now. To me, it was a sign of disrespect to go in the first round for a quarterback when you have Aaron Rodgers. I think the idea may have been to sort of have someone breathing down his neck to get him to, be like, go get a Super Bowl because your time here is going to expire eventually. But I just think that is a really bad sign of disrespect to your quarterback who's delivered a Super Bowl already, who makes you a competitor every year, no matter what you put around him. So really just a fractured relationship there in Green Bay. But I will be shocked if I talk about weird, seeing somebody in a different uniform. It would be strange to see Aaron Rodgers in a different uniform.
Kelly, you mentioned the comparison to Tom Brady, and you definitely do get a little bit of the sense that you got when Tom Brady decided to make his move to Tampa. But I think that before his heart was out of New England, he was putting pressure on the team to go out and make moves. And unfortunately, they were not in a forgiving cap situation and just didn't have the flexibility to make moves. We heard Bill Belichick during the season say there's a reason why we paid Cam Newton $1 million. I feel like Aaron Rodgers, you're going to hear these rumors. He's unhappy. But I do feel like ultimately he is putting pressure on the team to make more moves. And this is still a really good football team. They won 13-3 and were very close to ending up in the Super Bowl this season. He's got good weapons around him. Do you think he could be, kind of using that same tactic that Brady unsuccessfully tried to do in New England?
Here's the thing when you look at that situation. First of all, it still hurts that Brady is not a Patriot. And it still is frustrating that they couldn't make at least one move to bring someone in to help him. But like you said, the Packers were literally just in a divisional championship game. It's not like they're a bad team. I mean, he has Devontae Adams. He has weapons. Maybe not. Maybe he's one or two pieces short of breaking through that barrier and getting to the Super Bowl. But it's a good team. And they've been good for a long time. And I think it's a little different than the Tom Brady situation in that regard, because if you look at Brady's last season with the Patriots, they were not good. I mean, Edelman led the league in drop passes, and that was his number one target. So it was a much different situation. And you look at, they are similar in that they've been on these teams, like I mentioned before, for a long time, and they've brought a lot of good things to both these organizations. But you look, Brady took pay cuts for 20 years. He took pay cuts. He was willing for them to do what they could to go out and get someone, and they refused to. So I think you're right in the fact that the Packers have a chance here to not make those same mistakes, to learn from Bill Belichick and that front office and do what they can to keep Aaron Rodgers, because at the end of the day, like you said, what is Green Bay without Aaron Rodgers? I just doesn't seem right. And if the Packers can do something to keep him there, I think they should. I think they should put everything they can into keeping him there.
Well, thankfully for them, it's not at a place where Houston is, which is they're at a point of no return. The relationship, everything is out in the open. We know that there's frustration. Rodgers has had some remarks that would certainly indicate it, but it doesn't seem like something they can't get over. I mean, and they better get over it. They have to get over it. They have to make it right for him because of what he's done for them. He runs that offense. I mean, he's everything to that franchise. He may as well be the head coach. I mean, he's just one of those guys that you make him a Packer for life. I mean, Matt LaFleur is, I don't know if he's running the offense. I mean, it ought to be Aaron Rodgers running the offense. On the Brady thing, I take a little bit of pleasure. Well, I take a lot of pleasure in seeing what he's been able to do in Tampa Bay as a Jet fan, because I think it sets the record straight on something that was for a long time. There was just this, there was something ambiguous about, people said, how good is Tom Brady? Is he a system quarterback? Is he the product of Bill Belichick's system and culture? And that has now been flipped on its head. We now know that. I think we have the evidence to say that's not true. And I've always thought that was part of the reason he wanted to leave. I don't think he appreciated that lingered a little bit. And he said it. Look, he said it to Howard Stern. I couldn't do Bill's job and Bill couldn't do mine. The bottom line was that it was always the combination of the two. It turns out that Bruce Arians is also an outstanding head coach, which we've known for a long time. You put the two of them together and guess what? He's a conference champion again.
I could go on that, and Kelly agrees with me. We could talk that Tom Brady, New England, Bill Belichick, that's a whole nother conversation. So I'm going to try my hardest not to engage. I want to mention that we can't talk quarterbacks without mentioning the Eagles situation. Press conference with Doug Peterson replacement. Nick Sirianni did not clear things up in the slightest. He was non-committal on the future of his quarterbacks. Who do we think is the man under center in Philly next season? And where does the next guy end up?
This is a tough one because you look, Carson Wentz had one of the worst seasons a quarterback could possibly have. I mean, 12 games in, he led the NFL in interceptions, turnovers, sacks, and then he didn't even play the last 4 games of the season, and he still led the league in all those categories. So you look at who came in and replaced him, Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 77.6 passer efficiency rating. So not great stats, but it was also his first time stepping up in that position, and he was playing on an Eagles team that was decimated with injuries throughout the season. They were not playing at full strength. So you wonder, all right, is Jalen Hurts enough to take over? Because I don't think Carson Wentz is the answer, and I don't think he's going to be an Eagle much longer. But then you look, all right, where's Carson Wentz going to go? Because what team is going to take on somebody who just played so poorly, who was just one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and especially after you saw what happened with a team bringing on Cam Newton with the Patriots. They took a chance on a guy who was similar to Carson Wentz in that he was out of his prime, but he used to have the numbers. He used to have the portfolio, the repertoire, and he was out of his prime. And the Patriots took a chance on him, and it didn't work. It simply failed. And, one of the worst offensive seasons the Patriots have had in a long, long time. So, our team's going to be willing to take on somebody like Carson Wentz. One option I think he could. I don't know if he's into this, but I think it's an option is to go into Pittsburgh and be a backup for Ben Roethlisberger until Big Ben officially retires, whenever that is, and play under him and then eventually take over as quarterback for the Steelers. I think that could be an option.
I think Pittsburgh is an interesting place. I mean, I think that we don't know the ending to this Ben Roethlisberger scenario. I don't know if they want him to be their quarterback next year. I know Ben wants to continue. He's got 1 year left. So they're an interesting team. Somebody's going to try Carson Wentz reclamation project. We'll give him the chance, and he deserves it. I've been so wrong on this guy because I thought he was going to figure it out in Philadelphia, and he just never did. After Foles left, I said, okay, he's got the reins here, and I thought he was a franchise quarterback. Definitely doesn't appear that way. He was flat out terrible last year, and the Eagles are sort of just a mess. Talk about a head coach who didn't clarify anything. He also did not sound very good in that press conference. I mean, it was a little reminiscent of the Adam Gase scenario 2 years ago, and also what we saw in Detroit with Campbell. So these guys who you heard Tiki Barber say it earlier in the show can't nail the press conference, never a good sign. I don't want to bash the guy yet because I don't know if you guys heard, but he just didn't seem to have a good handle over what he was taking on leadership wise, that he just said, we're going to be a smart team. Like, it was, you'd have to hear the clip to get an understanding, but not a good look for the Eagles there with Sirianni.
It wasn't just to be a smart team. He said something along the lines that they wanted simple plays.
Yeah, simple.
Because they needed to know the plays before. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. And to me, it just seems like the Eagles are ready to move on. Kelly, to your point, if he ends up in Pittsburgh, I do not see they got to force Ben Roethlisberger to leave town, because he changed his game. He completely, changed his approach. Used to be more of a deep threat all the short game this year. But to me, I see a different AFC team coming in and picking up Wentz. I see the Colts doing that. They're a rumored destination for a lot of these quarterbacks now with Phil Rivers retiring, but I think that they're looking for a guy who's a bit younger, and we forget that Wentz is not old. He's still a pretty young quarterback, and at one point was an MVP candidate. And one other team in the AFC that could potentially start making phone calls is the New England Patriots. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the Pats making moves, not only with Wentz, but in this draft. Cam Newton is likely not heading for a reunion. So who's going to be their QB heading into this season?
Well, if that's not the $1 million question, I don't know what is. I mean, Cam Newton was a flat-out disappointment. I could list through the stats that their offense have had, but there's just no point. But we mentioned earlier in the show, and I looked it up over the break. They actually have the fourth most available cap space going into this offseason. So they have a little bit more room than I thought to go out and find somebody. For me, there's a lot of questions here. I don't think Wentz would be the answer, but I could see them settling with him just because he could go into a Patriot scheme and just be a system quarterback there, be average, maybe a little bit better than Cam Newton was, but I don't think that's a solid long-term option. But you look at the Patriots, 7-9 this past season. Cam Newton struggled. Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels, they work better with somebody like Brady, who is going to give them more options on the passing game. And I don't think they need a running quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. But they're going to need offensive weapons. So they're going to need somebody they can bring in who isn't going to cost a lot and who they're going to be able to get other weapons for. And maybe that's Carson Wentz. For me, I think it's Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he comes back to New England, a system that he already knows, and they like him. The Patriots like Jimmy Garoppolo. They kind of were forced to get rid of him just to clear up space. And I know a lot of people in the front office didn't want him to leave. And I think if he comes back there, like I said, he already knows the system. I think he'd be a good fit there. Obviously, I think he's somebody who was successful with the 49ers, but not because of just him. I think they made it as far as they did because their defense was so strong and they had such a good coach. But I could see Garoppolo somehow finding his way back in New England. I mean, he looks the part. He looks the part for a New England quarterback. He's got the looks. He's just got to play the same.
I think that's a good proposal, and I'm sure they're entertaining it. We know Belichick wanted him there. We know Belichick didn't want him gone. It was more Kraft and perhaps Brady. So I think they got to explore that option. But if it's Stafford, I could see Stafford having success there. I could see Wentz having success there. I could see Garoppolo having doing well there. But you got to look at the draft too. I know Bill's got something up his sleeve. There's somebody he likes. I don't know if it's Mac Jones. I don't know if it's one of the top quarterbacks, but I think the Jets are certainly a possibility to trade back. But any team that drafts early that may go pick up one of these quarterbacks is going to be in a position to trade back. So there's going to be an opportunity for the Patriots maybe to go up in the draft and draft somebody. I don't know if they like Zach Wilson. I don't know if they like Justin Fields, but either of those guys could have massive success in New England. They have the system. They've got the coach. If they have another bad year, look, the first year being bad under Cam Newton, the stopgap quarterback, I think they're going to get passes around the league. But if it happens again, we're going to be talking about a Patriots decline. And I think Bill Belichick wants to patch that up pretty soon.
Yeah, Kelly, you mentioned the cap space situation, and this is not only the first time in a long time that the Patriots have had that kind of flexibility because they've been a contender for the past 20 years. They also have a pretty good draft position, and they could absolutely leverage that and trade up if they get a target that they like. And to me, the Patriots are in such a unique position given their history. And you look at some of these options around the league, and to me, it's just not even worth trying to guess because it's going to come down to the money that they're getting from a big contract that they'd be picking up. It comes down to what team's asking price is. It comes down to so many different factors that I think the Patriots are planning for all these different situations. And it's just, I can't sit here and give you that prediction for who's going to be, for the Patriots next season.
Same. And I wish I had an inkling or an idea of who it would be, but in my opinion, it just can't get much worse. It really can't get much worse. Whoever they bring in, hopefully they can at least get more than 100 yards of offense in the air. And
it can get a lot worse than it can get a lot worse than 7-9. You're talking to a Jet fan here.
Record wise, it could get worse, but quarterback wise, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't want to say I would take 6 points, but I don't know. I think the 7-9 record says a lot about what Bill Belichick's able to do with whoever he has there. And as good as Brady, I know again we're going back on this conversation, but as good as Brady has been with the Bucs, and I think it says a lot about Brady as a player. The fact that Belichick was able to get 7 wins with this team, this roster that he had this year, says a lot about his coaching ability.
I don't even want to begin to go down that rabbit hole. So that will wrap our quarterback headline. We'll be back with a segment on the NBA All-Star Game. Voting has opened up, so we're going to take a quick break.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One on One. I'm Kelly Bright here with Chris Boccia and Jack Roche joining us again. This time we're talking NBA, and it wouldn't be right for us to talk basketball on the show unless we were talking about something that was way far in advance, and this was way too early to have this conversation, but we're going to do it anyways. The NBA All-Star voting is now officially open, and there's still the question as to whether or not there's actually going to be an All-Star game, but we might as well figure out the players who would be in the hypothetical one and figure out those rosters beforehand. Now, voting's open from January 7th to February 16th. And yes, this is a premature look. The season's only about a month old, but there's already some people who have made some pretty significant names for themselves in terms of being a part of the conversation to be an all-star. Some people potentially making their first NBA teams, all-NBA team, all-star teams. Some other people are just familiar names and no-brainers. But Jack, I'm going to start with you because I heard you have some hot takes on yours. Well, let's start with the East. Give me your starters for the Eastern Conference All-Star team.
Okay, well, I just want to say that some of my picks, guys have missed time, guys have gotten COVID, guys have been traded. So I've factored that in to my all-star selections. I'm going to start off with the guards. I chose Bradley Beal and Jaylen Brown. Beal putting up over 35 points a game, kind of a no-brainer for me, despite being on a bottom feeder in the Eastern Conference. And then going along with him, I'm picking my guy, Jaylen Brown. He's putting up 27.1 points per game this season. He has really stepped into the spotlight with Jason Tatum getting COVID and Gordon Hayward's departure to Charlotte in the offseason. I think the guards in the East is what guys are going to contest here because the front court to me is kind of a no-brainer. I've got Kevin Durant, Giannis, and Joel Embiid. Those are three guys that all could make a case for being MVP candidates this season. And then for the guards, I'll stand by my picks. I guess you could make the case for Kyrie. Chris, I know you've got someone else in the conversation. I have my arguments against him, but let's hear from that.
Well, I'm laughing because you're a Celtics fan, so you've got to acknowledge your bias the way that I would with any one of my guys that I put forward. I have James Harden there, and otherwise I have the exact same other four at least. I think the front court looks pretty obvious, but as far as the backcourt, it still remains to be seen. The Nets are now 8-2 in their last 10, and this is coming together for them. Harden put up 21 last night, I believe, and they look good. And this is obviously it's early, so the voting is going to continue. And honestly, I would love for you guys to explain to me the whole voting process here in the NBA because I don't frankly understand it.
Don't even try.
So I won't. We won't go down that path. But I think that this bet is a little bit banking on Harden turning it on, especially Durant's not in the lineup, gives him more of an opportunity to shine. But even Kyrie, you can certainly consider Kyrie as a potential starter in this All-Star game. There are some people who think you might see all three on the starting floor for the All-Star game, which would be something else. And I think that might be taking it a little far. But I do think you'll see Harden and Durant in the starting five. At least that's how I have it.
So for me, Jack, you can tell that we're both Boston fans because we have the exact same starting five. Bradley Beal, Jaylen Brown, like you said, 27.1 points per game. He's career highs in almost every category: assists, steals, rebounds, three-point shooting percentage, field goal percentage. So he's just playing, out of his mind right now. And I think arguably better than Jason Tatum, who a lot of people thought could be a potential MVP candidate going into the season. And I don't even have Jason Tatum, obviously, in that starting five. So again, like you said, Kevin Durant, Joel Embiid, Giannis, those are pretty obvious. I think, again, all legitimate MVP contenders, especially I think Joel Embiid is having a career high season. One player who I put as a reserve, I don't even think you can vote for that in the voting, but I put him anyways. Zach LaVine, 60.1 field goal percentage, 5.3 assists per game, which is a career high. His defense has been awesome. It's improved a lot. 45 points against the Clippers. He scored 39 against the Mavs and 38 against the Lakers. So three of the best teams in the league, and he's putting up almost 40-point games every time. So I think he has given himself a great chance to be included, if not in that starting five, at least as a reserve. I think he's done phenomenally in Chicago. So he's someone I definitely want to keep an eye on. Let's switch to the West. Let's go to the West. Jack, your starters for the West.
All right. I know our producer, Alex Walls, might not be crazy on my picks, but I've got my rationale for that. For the guards, I've got Luka and I've got Donovan Mitchell. I think he's putting up really good numbers on a team that's currently right at the top of the Western Conference standings. That's ahead of LeBron. that's ahead of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. He's really having a great season. And I definitely think that there's a good balance between, standings and team success and then individual stats. And to me, Donovan Mitchell is doing a great job at coming right in the middle of that. And that's why he starts for me. As for the front court, I think that there's a similar situation going on in the East. You've got LeBron, Kawhi, and Jokic. And to me, that's pretty non-negotiable. I think those are the three guys. And, I haven't heard your picks yet, but I'm seeing some nods and I'm expecting something pretty similar to that.
Yeah, as far as the front court, like the East, I have the same three as you. Durant, Giannis, Embiid in the East, and LeBron, Kawhi, Jokic in the West. But the backcourt a little different. I'm actually surprised that you didn't mention Steph Curry or Damian Lillard. I think they're both in the conversation here, but I ultimately have Lillard and Doncic here. I was in between Lillard and Curry for that other guard spot, but ultimately you mentioned the standings factor. I took that into account, and I think Damian Lillard is a bona fide superstar.
I agree with you completely, Chris. We have the same starting five: Luka Doncic, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, obviously, Jokic, and then I also went with Damian Lillard. But this one was hard for me. I was going back and forth between Steph Curry and Damian Lillard because those two names are so often put in the same conversation as to who's better. And honestly, I would give it to Steph Curry almost every time, but I just think this season Damian Lillard's stats are just too good to not have him in that starting five. Steph Curry, obviously, he could be in the MVP conversations considering what he's doing with the lack of support system he has. But I think Damian Lillard, you look at those stats, you have to include him in that five. So as far as any other standouts, are there any other guys you guys could see as potential people who could make maybe their first All-Star team or just a surprise? For me, Paul George is one. I think he's having a great season. He is playing alongside Kawhi Leonard, which I think takes away a little bit from his stats, but I think Paul George is someone who's definitely made a name for himself and could at least be in one of those reserve spots.
Yeah, Paul George is definitely a name. He's having a great season. I don't know. For me, I think that the biggest question mark is really the guards in the West. And to me, I view kind of Curry and Lillard through the same lens. They're both having phenomenal statistical seasons and kind of are the heart and soul of their team. But both of those teams are hovering around 500. Portland's 9-8, Golden State's 10-9. And to me, it's tough to kind of give one of those guys the edge. And that's why I put Mitchell in there, because he's also having great statistics while leading a team to 15-4. So that's my rationale.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that Donovan Mitchell would have been my answer to your question, Kelly. I mean, I think I have him as, is there a wild card slot? Am I right about that? Yeah, there's two wild cards. That's where I have him now, but I could see him slotting in there at guard. I've even seen a scenario where LeBron is one of the guards and that clears the way for another forward. I am not so familiar with this voting system, as I said to you guys. Apparently you can put LeBron in as a guard, but Doncic is pretty hard to argue with there. I think Kawhi is hard to argue with. And LeBron obviously is, still LeBron. But that would have been my wild card, would have been Mitchell.
Well, those are our picks. There you have them. It might be too early to have them, but oh well. We'll see in a few weeks who is most accurate, who's right. But until then, after this break, we're going to get into the Super Bowl. We've talked about Tom Brady all day, and we get to talk about him some more. It's my dream scenario. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Alongside Chris Baccia and Jack Roche. Now, we cannot go an entire show this close to the end of the NFL season without talking about the Super Bowl. Now, it's a week away, but Tom Brady is going in to play Patrick Mahomes February 7th, Kansas City Chiefs versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Now, when Tom Brady played in and won his first Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes was in kindergarten. And now the two are facing off. Tom Brady trying to break his own record of being the oldest quarterback to win a Super Bowl, and Patrick Mahomes going in to try and win his second. I'm pretty sure you guys know my position. We'll get into that a little bit later, but Chris, we'll start with you. First and foremost, who's winning the game?
Who's winning the game? That's the big question. I have not come to a conclusion yet, but I will for the sake of the show. I mean, you've asked it of me. I am leaning Kansas City. But again, I could see it going any way. I just think Patrick Mahomes is too good. I think that the storyline is tremendous of Brady Mahomes. I think it's arguably one of the best quarterback matchups we've ever had on a Super Bowl Sunday. But I will go to what Tiki Barber said, which was that if somebody's going to mess it up, it could be Brady. But Brady's been to 10 of these. So that's where I'm stuck, and there's something about Bruce Arians potentially getting his first that intrigues me. But when all is said and done, I mean, and I reserve the right to change my position in the next week because it's, we're still a week away. But I do think I'm leaning Chiefs right now.
I'd have to agree. I'm slightly leaning Chiefs. We just got the news recently that left tackle Eric Fisher, torn Achilles, will miss the Super Bowl. That's a huge loss for them. But to me, it's so hard to put this on a Bucks Chiefs level. This is something more than just these teams. This is the legacy of two of the game's biggest players. And you think about Tom Brady, and to me, he's the greatest to ever do it. I think Kelly will agree with me on that one. And there have been a lot of challengers to that position throughout the years. We've seen Aaron Rodgers as a guy who at one point could, make the case for a challenger. But, Brady's got 6, potentially 7. And this could really be a monumental step for Mahomes, not only to defeat Brady, kind of as like a passing of torch moment. And if he's got 2 under his belt at age 25, there's no reason why he can't eventually step to that 6. And I understand how hard it is to get there, but this is definitely the first step to taking that kind of championship belt away from Brady.
It really is it's like a LeBron Jordan matchup. If you really think about it, the greatest of all time, and then somebody who could potentially be the new greatest of all time. And I think Patrick Mahomes, like you said, especially if he were to win this one and have 2 at the age of 25, he is setting himself up to overtake Brady and maybe get 8 someday. But at the same time, Tom Brady's still playing. And like you mentioned, this is his 10th time doing it. Since we've had a Super Bowl era, Tom Brady will now have played in 20% of those games, those Super Bowls. So he just has unparalleled and unmatched experience in the situation. And if you look at this Tampa Bay team, they're a team that I think really saw a shift, a turning point in their Week 13 bye, and that came off the heels of a loss
Right.
to none other than the Kansas City Chiefs. Right, you come out of that bye week after that loss to the Chiefs, and Tampa Bay's offense has been virtually unstoppable since. 240 points, 34.3 points per game, 34.3 points per game, 7 straight wins, and they've just looked like a new team. Brady has looked like his old self, and they're starting to get some of their weapons back that they were missing earlier on in the season. So they're just really coming into their own and looking like a team that is going to take the best to beat, which a lot of people would argue, like you both have, that the Chiefs would be that best team that would overtake them. But I would argue that in this situation, I'm taking the Tampa Bay's defense over the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, the Tampa Bay defense, there's something to be said there, led by Todd Bowles and a very good unit. This is a team that's gotten it together. I agree that they are a totally different team than they were when they lost to the Chiefs in Week 12. We haven't even mentioned the fact that this game will be in Tampa Bay, which just adds to the ridiculous intrigue of this Super Bowl 55. And Tom Brady, an underdog, which is sort of bizarre, right? He never has been, and he's been doubted all year. I have to give some credit to our producer, Alex Bowles, who said, I believe, I could be right. I could be wrong, but I think he did. He says I'm correct. He did say that the Buccaneers were going to be at this point, and I wasn't sure about that. I saw so many vulnerabilities from this Tampa Bay offense led by Tom Brady, throwing interceptions, making mistakes. And nobody gets it together better than Tom Brady when it comes playoff time. And here they are. They've got the momentum. I think the Eric Fisher point is actually very important, the left tackle. And all I can think about now, a week away from the game, is that I really hope it's a good one. There's nothing better than a good Super Bowl. So I'm very much looking forward.
I remember when the Pats lost to the Titans last year in the playoffs. I was actually at the game, and
really
a part of my heart just crumbled and, will never come back. And I've been slightly down on the Bucs this season. I definitely have been a bit bearish on them throughout the playoffs. I thought they were going to lose to the Saints. I thought they were going to lose to the Packers. And here I am thinking that they're going to lose to the Chiefs. And it just would be so Brady-esque to go out and do that again. I can't say that I'm not rooting for them, because, he's not playing for the Pats, but, I've still got a soft spot for Brady. I want him to go out and get number 7. But I'm just conflicted. I can't bet against the reigning Super Bowl champs, but I can't bet against Tom Brady either.
It's a tough situation to be in, but I just look at it and I'm like, there's just no way. Now I've come on this show. I've been on the show 2 weeks now, and both times I have picked, and we've had a pick 'em segment, and I have picked the Bucs both times, and I'm 2 for 2, trying to be 3 for 3. So I got to stick with it. I got to pick them again, and let's take the conversation away from Brady real fast, and I want to talk a little bit about defense, because I really think that the Bucs defense is a huge reason why they have made it so far. I mean, you just mentioned, Chris, the 3 interceptions in the last game. That that game isn't as close if the defense doesn't step up in a big way. And I read an article on ESPN, and it was talking about how the Bucs, since that bye week, have changed how they play defense. And this might be a little a football nerd kind of thing, but they're using a lot more 2-man coverage, and they've increased to using it about 18% of the time, and they were using it 4% of the time in weeks 1 through 12. And what that does is, when you use a 2-man coverage, you can still play aggressively with those 5 underneath defenders, including being able to press, which the Bucs have done a great job with. But you also can use the safeties in 2 deep zones up top, so you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And this is a Bucs defense that's led the league in run defense all year, and now, because of the way they've shifted their team, they're also going to have more strength in the deeper zones, especially against Patrick Mahomes, who loves to throw the deep ball. And you also just got your defensive tackle, Vita Vea, 347-pound guy. He's back. That can't hurt. That definitely can't hurt when trying to pressure Patrick Mahomes. So I'm excited to see what their defense does against Patrick Mahomes. But I definitely think it's going to be a good game. And like you mentioned, Chris, it's so good for football and it's so good for sports after everything that's happened in the past 12, 14 months. For us to have a storyline like this, something awesome to watch happen. Two of the greatest going at it in prime time in the brightest lights.
Yeah, and I thought if they were going to beat Green Bay, they were going to have to beat Green Bay with their defense, and it didn't really go that way, right? It ended up requiring a lot of offense as well, and I did not know or think that Brady was going to be able to do it, which you just never doubt Tom Brady. It always you always end up being wrong if you do it. There's just nobody better under pressure. And Brady ended up sort of outslinging Aaron Rodgers, and he does not have Patrick Mahomes' arm, and he doesn't have Patrick Mahomes' pure ability. But what he does have is the experience, and you can't discount that. He's got the brain, and he's got Bruce Arians behind him. This is, I also think the head coaching matchup is pretty legendary between Andy Reid and Bruce Arians, who has never won a Super Bowl as a head coach, only as an assistant, a guy that is tremendous and no nonsense. And it's been pretty awesome to see the Buccaneers come together because they got off the ground pretty slow. You had this transition, right, for Tom Brady, who's only ever had one head coach, and they figured it out, and little by little they clicked, and they are obviously at peak form right now. I'm not sure if that's the case for Kansas City with the concussion sustained by Mahomes. We'll see. I know that's what we keep coming back to in this segment, but it's hard to say right now. It really is. But I am thinking Chiefs still.
Yeah, no, I understand the importance of momentum. And the Bucs were a team that finished the season really hot. But I mean, how do you criticize a team for not being better when they're already great? They won the Super Bowl last year, and then their quarterback gets hurt. So, obviously momentum's not on their side, but from a pure talent team standpoint, it's really hard to not say the Chiefs, and you mentioned the defense, Kelly, and to be quite honest, that may be the Buccaneers' identity this season. They're an incredible defensive team, and for the first time in a long time, it hurts me to say this, but when there's 2 minutes left in the game and you've got one drive left, I'm putting my money on Patrick Mahomes.
I would strongly disagree with that. I'm shocked as a former Patriots fan that you would say that. But
I'm still a Patriots fan. Does that strip me of my honorary fan status?
I understand that. Patrick Mahomes, I think I can't believe I'm saying this on radio, but Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes is a better quarterback right now. It's simple. Patrick Mahomes is a better quarterback than Tom Brady right now. But
absolutely.
And yeah, exactly. I don't think you can debate that, but to win a Super Bowl, it takes a lot more than a great quarterback. It takes somebody who's a leader. It takes someone who knows how to win, and it's a whole team effort. You look at any of the Super Bowls Tom Brady wins. The defense comes up in huge ways. Players make ridiculous plays. Edelman's catch, where he catches it with his fingertips on the ground off of someone, that kind of thing. It takes other players. It's not just the quarterback. So, even if Tom Brady if Tom Brady wins, it's not all on him. It's the Buccaneers win. And like you said, Bruce Arians as a head coach, it's great to see that from them. And if they don't win, I don't think that takes away from Tom Brady's legacy either.
Yeah. I'll give a final thought before you wrap us out. I mean, I just think it'll help if the Chiefs don't do something like Green Bay did, which was give the ball back to Tom Brady at the end. That's just absurd, and you can't make that mistake. Look, good things happen to Tom Brady. They always have. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not the same this year. A ridiculous catch, something absurd happening. We've seen it so many times, time and time again. I don't want to take away from what he's been able to do with his own talent. It'll certainly help if the Chiefs don't make the failure that the Packers did last week, but we'll see.
We will see. And that game is still a week away, but that's going to do it for us for tonight's show. Jack Roche has been awesome on headlines. Chris Baccia, my wonderful co-host, our producer, who could never possibly get enough credit, Alex Wolves. I'm Kelly Bright. And One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. The director of WFUV Sports is Bobby Shaffordini. Good night to all. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you guys next week. Definitely going to get more into the Super Bowl. I'm hoping that whoever's hosting next week is just as supportive as Tom Brady as I've been. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week.